Chapter 279. When he heard Su Zimo's words, Pang Ming's heart skipped a beat. What did he mean by that? Did this green-robed cultivator dare to? Before Pang Ming could finish his thought, Su Zimo flashed and executed Divine Steed Fleeting. In the blink of an eye, he appeared before Pang Ming and said coldly, "Since you can't teach this beast a lesson, I'll teach it for you." A malevolent aura surged, suffocating and shuddering one's heart. In his daze, Pang Ming felt that it was not a human that was charging over, but a demon beast that was even more frightening than the spirit lion before him. The spirit lion seemed to have sensed the danger as well, and its fur stood on end. Its initially massive body expanded once more, looking exceptionally ferocious. Roar! The spirit lion roared at Su Zimo, shaking the void as it bared its fangs with a menacing expression. The lion's roar was extremely forceful and powerful, containing a tremendous amount of power. When it suddenly erupted, it was indeed intimidating to ordinary cultivators. However, Su Zimo did not seem to have heard it. It was no exaggeration to say that Su Zimo, who had cultivated the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness, was much stronger than the spirit lion in every aspect. Even the roar of an ancient remnant beast might not be able to shake Su Zimo's mind, let alone an ordinary spirit demon. At the same time, the spirit lion leaped up with all its might and waved its claws. Opening its mouth, it bit down viciously towards Su Zimo's neck. "You must have a death wish." Su Zimo sneered and reached out. With a flip of his palm, he pressed down on the spirit lion's head and pushed it down. This was not some intricate move. It was a contest of strength. The spirit lion made use of the strength of its limbs to leap up. Coupled with the strong physique of demons, it should have had the advantage. Unexpectedly, right in front of everyone, the spirit lion had just leaped up when it was pushed back down by Su Zimo in an even more ferocious and savage manner. Bang! Pressing down on the spirit lion's head, Su Zimo slammed it into the ground savagely, causing the limestone to shatter and blood to splatter everywhere. There was a huge pit in the ground and the spirit lion's skull was shattered. It was already dead. Hiss! The cultivators who saw this were shocked and gasped in shock. How strong was this person's physical body? He had actually squashed a spirit demon to death with a single palm. This person must have cultivated some kind of powerful body-refining secret technique. Although he looks weak, the explosive power of his body is too fierce. Could he be from the Southern Mountains sect? It's said that the Southern Mountains sect's body tempering technique is the strongest among the 5 great sections. He doesn't seem to be from our Southern Mountains sect. I've never seen him before. Among the crowd, a Southern Mountains sect cultivator was confused. Pang Ming had just taken out a middle-grade flying sword when the spirit lion in front of him died. It was too fast. Seeing Su Zimo's eyes, Pang Ming was so scared that his whole body trembled. He felt his scalp go numb and his legs go soft. At this moment, he finally realized that the green-clothed man had no intention of letting him go at all. "Stop!" Not far away, 2 scarlet vulture guards shouted loudly as they dashed over. The spirit vultures beneath them emitted high-pitched and sharp cries as they stared fixedly at Su Zimo on the ground with ferocious gazes. Whoosh! Whoosh! Wielding a dagger axe in one hand, the 2 scarlet vulture guards slapped their storage bags with the other and summoned a flying sword. Pointing it forward, they stabbed it towards Su Zimo. Go! At the same time, Pang Ming composed himself and injected spirit energy furiously. The flying sword in his palm shone brightly and pierced forward with a swoosh. 3 flying swords split into 3 different directions and tore through the air at the same time. Su Zimo sneered and lowered his body, almost sticking to the ground as he darted forward. Su Zimo's body was distorted to an unimaginable degree. Like a gigantic anaconda, he shuttled through the 3 flying swords unscathed. The next moment, Su Zimo stood in front of Pang Ming. Reaching out, he gripped Pang Ming's throat and squeezed. Snap! Pang Ming's throat was shattered and his eyes were widened so much that they almost popped out. His head tilted and his tongue lolled out as he fell limply to the ground, dead. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo had already killed 2 people. The crowd was in chaos. This was the capital of Great Zhou. In broad daylight with the scarlet vulture guards nearby, no one expected that not only would this green-robed cultivator dare to kill, he would even claim 2 lives in a single move. This person is crazy. That thought flashed through most of the cultivators' minds as they hurriedly scattered in all directions, afraid that they would be implicated. Audacious thief! How dare you act so brazenly in the capital? In that short period of time, 2 scarlet vulture guards had already arrived. Far away, there were even scarlet vulture guards speeding over from the skies. There were also some white dots that were rushing over at lightning speed. Today, the scarlet vulture and white hawk guards were patrolling the capital. The white dots in the skies were the white hawk guards. Su Zimo looked at the scarlet vulture guards that were swooping over with a mocking look in his eyes as he sneered. So the 2 of you aren't blind. You've arrived just in time. Everyone could hear the mockery in Su Zimo's words and could not help but click their tongues. This person was truly audacious to provoke anyone. The next moment, an even more shocking scene happened as the crowd exploded. Against the incoming scarlet vulture guards, Su Zimo did not dodge or retreat. His eyes lit up as he reached out with both arms and leaped, grabbing the claws of the spirit vultures in midair. Alarmed, the 2 spirit vultures flapped their wings, causing gusts of wind and sand to fill the air as they flew upwards with all their might. However, the scarlet vulture guards on the spirit vultures were expressionless as they wielded their dagger axes. Killing intent surged in their eyes as they stabbed viciously towards Su Zimo in the middle. Come down! Su Zimo hollered and exerted strength in his arms. In an unreasonable manner, he yanked the 2 spirit vultures down from midair. The strength of the 2 spirit vultures could not compare to this seemingly frail scholar. Bang! Bang! Almost at the same time, the 2 spirit vultures slammed heavily onto the ground, letting out tragic cries as dust flew everywhere. The 2 scarlet vulture guards lost their balance and their dagger axes lost their aim, nearly stabbing each other. Both of them hurriedly jumped down from the spirit vultures, looking wretched. Poof! Su Zimo took a huge step forward and stomped a spirit vulture to death beneath his feet. In a flash, he sliced into the chest of a scarlet vulture guard and leaned in fiercely. Thud! 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 That person retreated 3 steps before coming to a stop. Immediately after, blood drained from that person's face and his armor was intact. However, his body within exploded into a blood mist with broken limbs flying everywhere. Although it seemed like a simple lean, it contained all of Su Zimo's strength. Although the Scarlet Vulture Guard was at perfected foundation establishment, there was no way his body could withstand such a terrifying burst. The other Scarlet Vulture Guard had just channeled his spirit energy and his dagger axes shone brightly. Just as he was about to step forward, he could not help but shudder and retreat when he saw that the nearby Scarlet Vulture and White Hawk Guards were rushing over. There was no need for him to fight to the death with this lunatic just because of a moment's anger. Once everyone arrived, this person would naturally be killed. Su Zimo's gaze was deep and unfathomable. As though he could see through the person's intentions, he strode forward and said indifferently, "Don't leave either. Hand over your life." Chapter 280. Ah! The remaining Scarlet Vulture Guard hollered and a vicious glint flashed through his eyes. Given how Su Zimo had attacked just now, there was no way he could escape at this distance. His only hope of survival was to exchange a few more rounds with Su Zimo and wait for reinforcements from the other Scarlet Vulture and White Hawk Guards. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo had already closed in. The dagger axe in the Scarlet Vulture Guard's hand shone brightly as he channeled strength with both arms. The dagger axe trembled and drew a semicircle in midair, piercing towards Su Zimo with a chilling intent. Spirit energy surged and a spirit energy storm seemed to have formed around the dagger axe with a terrifying might. Su Zimo's expression was unchanged as he reached out with his palm and grabbed the incoming dagger axe in a seemingly effortless manner. Curl and tremble. The spirit energy storm around the dagger axe dissipated instantly. Buzz! The dagger axe trembled violently and the Scarlet Vulture Guard could not hold on to it any longer. His palm split open and he cried out in pain as his palm was already drenched in blood. Right in front of countless gazes, the moment the two sides made contact, the Scarlet Vulture Guard's weapon was already snatched away by this unknown green-robed cultivator. Everyone's eyeballs nearly popped out. He was only at late-stage foundation establishment, but he was able to withstand a spirit weapon with his body and not lose? Just how strong was this person's physique? Su Zimo's gaze was cold as he gripped the dagger axe that he had snatched and stabbed in reverse, flicking it upwards. Poof! Blood flashed. The throat of the Scarlet Vulture guard was pierced instantly and his eyes dimmed as he fell to the ground with a thud. When everyone saw that, they were shocked and their mouths were agape. Their eyes filled with disbelief. The situation had changed too quickly and even now many people could not react in time. It had only been more than 10 breaths since Su Zimo attacked, but 4 people were already dead on the spot. If it was said that Su Zimo killing 2 cultivators from True Fire Elixir Workshop was already shocking enough. Later on, he'd made a decisive move and domineeringly suppressed 2 Crimson Vulture guards, and it had already caused everyone to be astounded. Decisive in killing. It's been a long time since I've seen such a ruthless cultivator. In the crowd, an old man secretly clicked his tongue and sighed with emotion. So what if you're decisive in killing? In the end you're still a dead man. That's right. If this person had only killed the disciples of True Fire Elixir Workshop, he might still have a chance to live. However, just now, he even killed the Scarlet Vulture guards. This is equivalent to openly challenging the royal family's authority. While the crowd was discussing, their gazes were always on Su Zimo. Their minds were tense, afraid that he would rush into the crowd and kill wantonly. After all, in everyone's eyes, Su Zimo was already a dead man. Since he knew that he was going to die, it was normal for him to kill a few more of them. Unexpectedly, after Su Zimo killed 4 people in a row, he stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His expression was indifferent, and he did not take any other drastic actions. When he saw that the Scarlet Vulture and White Hawk guards had already arrived and were gradually surrounding him, Su Zimo did not escape either, as though he had given up. However, what puzzled everyone was that they could not see any hint of panic or fear in Su Zimo's eyes. They were like an ancient well, deep and dark without any ripples. At that moment, the green-robed cultivator standing beside the 4 corpses seemed to have turned into a mystery. Nobody could see through him. Initially, everyone was caught off guard when he attacked. Eventually, everyone was puzzled by his calmness. Suddenly, an old man said in a deep voice, "Actually, that green-robed cultivator does have a chance of survival." "What do you mean?" someone asked. The old man said, "Did you guys notice? Strictly speaking, it's not that person's fault. He Xing was the one who attacked first. From that perspective, although that person's actions were extreme, there's a reasonable explanation. Even though killing was not allowed in the capital, if someone attacked another person, the latter could not possibly stay on the spot and allow the other party to slaughter them. They could definitely retaliate." The old man's meaning was simple. If everything was based on the premise that He Xing attacked Su Zimo first, then Su Zimo's actions later on could be considered as legitimate retaliation. That's useless. That person is bound to die. That's right. Even if he's in the right, he's facing 2 major factions, True Fire Sect and the Scarlet Vulture Guards. What kind of status does he have to go against those 2 factions? Unless that person's status is so high that even the Emperor of Great Zhou has to give him face, he's definitely going to die. Not far away, Su Xiaoning had just snapped out of her shock and was about to run towards Su Zimo when she paused. Su Zimo narrowed his eyes with a sharp gaze and shook his head without a trace. The current situation was complicated and unclear. He was not sure what the outcome would be either. Given the circumstances, Su Zimo did not want Xiaoning to be embroiled in it. The siblings had a telepathic connection and Xiaoning understood. Although she did not head forward, her eyes were filled with worry. Swoosh! 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 Before long, the Scarlet Vulture and White Hawk guards closest to the place had arrived. Looking at the few corpses on the ground, many of them had cold expressions and looked at Su Zimo with endless killing intent. What's going on? Right at this moment, a cold and gloomy voice slowly sounded. Under everyone's gazes, a figure flew over with lightning speed without anything beneath his feet. In the blink of an eye, he was already in midair and hovered in midair. Perfected Jin Dan. The person wore scarlet robes and was bald without eyebrows. His aura was cold and his gaze was as sharp as an eagle's. "Greetings, Commander." In midair, many Scarlet Vulture guards shouted in unison. The person who had arrived was the commander of the Scarlet Vulture guards, known as Vulture. He was ruthless and had a violent temperament. Vulture had a unique set of tortures, and any cultivator who fell into his hands would suffer a fate worse than death. It was said that there was a cultivator who offended Vulture previously, and was tortured for an entire month. He had a mental breakdown and went completely insane before finally dying of 1,000 cuts in a tragic manner. There was a saying in the Great Zhou dynasty: one would rather commit suicide than fall into the hands of Vulture. Right after Vulture arrived, another figure descended as well. She wore white robes that were spotless and had extraordinary looks. With a long sword by her waist, she was graceful. "Greetings, Commander." When they saw that person, the White Hawk Guards in midair cupped their fists and nodded. The White Hawk Guards were all female cultivators and their voices were crisp, attracting everyone's attention. The person who had arrived was the commander of the White Hawk Guards, Bai Yuhan. As the sect competition approached, there were 2 guards patrolling the capital daily while the other guard rested. It was a rotation. Today, the guards patrolling the capital were the Scarlet Vulture and White Hawk Guards. Right now, the commanders of both guards had arrived. Looking at the 4 corpses on the ground, Bai Yuhan frowned slightly and scanned Su Zimo before shaking her head. In Bai Yuhan's opinion, this green-robed cultivator was unfamiliar and did not have a sect badge on his waist. He was most likely an itinerant cultivator. From the looks of it, this person's fate was already set. Chapter 281. What's going on? The commander of the Scarlet Vulture Guards, Bald Vulture, surveyed his surroundings expressionlessly and asked in a deep voice. Some cultivators from True Fire Elixir Workshop hurried forward and described everything that happened just now with exaggerated details. Fufufu. Bald Vulture looked at Su Zimo playfully with a cruel gaze and laughed maniacally. It's over. That green-robed cultivator is definitely going to be tortured to death in Bald Vulture's hands. If I were that person, I would kill myself here right now and have a quick death. Many cultivators discussed in hushed tones. The commander of the White Hawk Guards, Bai Yuhan, could not help but frown when she heard the description. There was something strange about the entire situation. Initially, it was a feud between True Fire Elixir Workshop and Azure Frost Elixir Workshop. Or rather, it was a personal feud between He Xing and Su Xiaoning. Even though Pang Ming used his lion to injure and knock over the elixir cauldron, and He Xing bullied others later on, the situation was still under control. It was only when the green-robed cultivator appeared that the situation went completely out of control. It was true that He Xing attacked first. However, the green-robed cultivator's reaction was way too intense. He killed 2 people in a row without giving the other party any chance to explain. Furthermore, even if killing He Xing was justified as retaliation, the killing of the Scarlet Vulture Guards after that did not make sense. Instinctively, Bai Yuhan looked at Su Zimo and was slightly stunned. Despite being surrounded by 2 guards of the capital and facing 2 commanders, one of whom was the cruel Bald Vulture, this person did not show any fear at all. In fact, Bai Yuhan could not even see any hint of panic in his eyes. This was someone who dared to kill in the capital, and even though they were guards, he was still so decisive. Now that he was surrounded, what sort of backing did this person have to be so calm? Bald Vulture looked down at Su Zimo with excitement in his eyes as he said sinisterly, very good, very good. I've been bored during this period of time, and someone's here to relieve my boredom. You can't touch me. Suddenly, Su Zimo spoke and looked at Bald Vulture calmly. The moment he said that, the crowd was in an uproar. Who was this person to dare to openly challenge the commander of the Scarlet Vulture Guards? He must be tired of living. Vulture's face darkened. Ever since he took the position of Grand Commander of the Scarlet Vulture Guards, no one had dared to speak to him like this in all these years. Brat, let me tell you, even if the Heavenly Emperor comes today, he won't be able to save you. Bald Vulture said coldly, don't worry, I have 100 ways to make you wish you were dead. In the end, you will kneel before me and beg for death. At this moment, another voice came from afar. You really can't touch him. Everyone looked over towards the source of the voice, and they saw a figure rushing over like a bolt of lightning. He soared into the sky with great strides, and his speed was extremely swift. In the blink of an eye, he'd already arrived here. The newcomer was clad in green armor. He was tall and burly, with a black face and curly beard. It was actually the Azure Falcon Guard's Grand Commander Mu Dongqing. When the curly-bearded man saw Su Zimo, He gave him a look, hinting him not to worry. Su Zimo nodded slightly in greeting. The Azure Falcon Guard should be resting today, and the bearded man should not have appeared here. But now that the bearded man was able to arrive in time, someone must have informed him. Su Zimo swept his gaze and realized that Nian Qi was nowhere to be seen. With a quick thought, he vaguely guessed the truth. That last sure is smart. Su Zimo lamented internally. When they saw the bearded man appear and heard his words, everyone was invigorated. They could vaguely sense that the situation had changed once more. Mu Dongqing, what are you doing here on your day off? Bald Vulture's gaze shifted between the bearded man and Su Zimo as he suddenly asked. The bearded man replied in a seemingly casual manner. Nothing much. I saw that there was quite a commotion here, so I came over to take a look. Fufu. Bald Vulture chuckled. There's nothing for you to do here. I'm enough. You can leave. All right. The bearded man nodded and landed on the ground. Grabbing Su Zimo's arm, he soared into the air and wanted to bring Su Zimo away from this place. Bald Vulture's expression changed. In a flash, he arrived in front of the bearded man and blocked their path. With a dark expression, he asked slowly, Mu Dongqing, what's the meaning of this? Nothing much. The bearded man stood in front of Su Zimo without a change in expression. Bald Vulture pointed to the corpse on the ground and sneered. This person has no respect for the law and went on a killing spree in the capital. Furthermore, he killed 2 of my Scarlet Vulture guards and you want to take him away just like that? Mu Dongqing, aren't you way too bold? The bearded man frowned. Suddenly, Su Zimo whispered something into his ears. The bearded man's eyes lit up as he said in a deep voice, Vulture, since He Xing was the one who attacked first, he deserved to die as well. As for your Scarlet Vulture guards, it's not honorable either and you're clearly biased. You're responsible for your negligence. Mu Dongqing, the Azure Falcon guards are resting today. It's not your place to interfere in the matters here. Bald Vulture's eyes flickered and his voice turned colder. The bearded man said in a deep voice, Today, I'm only Mu Dongqing and not the Azure Falcon guards. No other Azure Falcon guards will interfere in today's matter as well. TSK. Suddenly, Bald Vulture reared his head and laughed sinisterly, sending chills down one's spine. A moment later, the laughter came to a stop. Bald Vulture slapped his storage bag and withdrew 2 silver hooks that shone with a cold glint. He said slowly, If you want to protect him today, you'll be going against me and the entire Scarlet Vulture guards. At that time, don't blame me for being merciless. When they heard that, the Scarlet Vulture guards in midair drew their spirit weapons one after another and glared at the bearded man with ferocious gazes. The bearded man went silent. Bald Vulture was using the strength of the entire guard to pressure him. As long as he dared to object, he would be going against the entire Scarlet Vulture guards. Just when everyone thought that the bearded man was going to compromise, the bearded man did not back down at all. He gently touched his storage bag and a huge iron hammer appeared in his hand, emitting a steady and heavy aura. Tit for tat. I'll say it again. You can't touch him today. The bearded man's gaze was like a torch as the hammer in his hands trembled. Spirit light shone brightly and his aura expanded as 4 spirit patterns shone brightly, causing a series of exclamations. 4 spirit patterns, a supreme-grade spirit weapon. Everyone was in an uproar. On one hand, they were shocked by the supreme-grade spirit weapon in the bearded man's hands. On the other hand, no one expected the bearded man to go against the entire Scarlet Vulture guards for the sake of this green-robed cultivator. The hammer in the bearded man's hand shone with a spirit light. Under the guidance of his aura, the Scarlet Vulture guards in midair circulated their spirit energy one after another, and the dagger axes in their hands shone brightly with flying swords. In the blink of an eye, both sides were ready to fight at any moment. Chapter 282. To everyone, no matter what the cause of this conflict was, it was completely out of control now that it had developed to this point and a huge battle was inevitable. With 2 Scarlet Vulture guards dead, there was no way Bald Vulture would back down in front of everyone. He had to seek justice. Otherwise, it would not be just him. The reputation of the entire Scarlet Vulture guards in the capital would be tarnished. Right now, the bearded man's attitude was akin to adding fuel to the fire. There was even less reason for Bald Vulture, and the Scarlet Vulture guards to back down. In reality, contrary to everyone's expectations, Bald Vulture was caught between a rock and a hard place. Where did Mu Dongqing get his hands on a supreme-grade spirit weapon? Damn it! Bald Vulture cursed internally with an imperceptible hint of jealousy in his eyes. Although he was the commander of the Scarlet Vulture Guards, he had not obtained a single supreme-grade spirit weapon after all these years. Under normal circumstances, with him holding back the bearded man in a huge battle, the other Scarlet Vulture Guards would be able to suppress the green-robed cultivator with ease. But now the bearded man had suddenly taken out a supreme-grade spirit weapon. He was weaker than the bearded man to begin with. Coupled with that supreme-grade spirit weapon, Bald Vulture was even less of a match for the bearded man. If they were to fight, the outcome would be unpredictable. Right then, Bai Yuhan spoke, "Commanders, if you guys fight in the capital over a small matter and cause panic, I'm afraid both of you won't be able to escape punishment when the king blames you." The bearded man and Bald Vulture were in a tense standoff. At that moment, Bai Yuhan was the only one qualified to speak. The atmosphere between the two sides eased slightly. Bai Yuhan continued, "I have a suggestion. Both of you, commanders, take a step back and meet the emperor immediately for the king to decide." When they heard that, the bearded man and Bald Vulture heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. "I'm fine with that," the Vulture man sneered and took the initiative to speak. In his opinion, as long as he met the emperor, the bearded man would definitely be punished and the green-robed cultivator would not be able to escape death as well. The bearded man put away his weapon and nodded. "Sure." Bai Yuhan cupped her fists. "That's great. I'll head to the palace first to report this matter." With that said, Bai Yuhan turned and left. She transformed into a stream of light and disappeared before everyone's eyes in the blink of an eye. Sweeping his gaze between the bearded man and Su Zimo, Bald Vulture's eyes flashed with mockery. "Let's go. Let's see what you can say once we're in the grand hall of the palace with the might of the heavens." The bearded man smiled and did not reply. He turned to Su Zimo and asked in a low voice, "Sir, do you have any other instructions? Please wait a moment." Su Zimo comes to Ning. "Brother." Su Xiaoning frowned and looked worried. Her slender little hand grabbed Su Zimo's sleeve subconsciously, not daring to let go. She was so anxious that she was about to cry. "Why are you crying?" Su Zimo smiled and reached out his hand to rub Su Xiaoning's head lovingly, messing up the long hair on her forehead. When they were little, Su Zimo liked to mess up Ning's hair. Each time Ning would fly into a rage and chase after Su Zimo. The two of them chased and fled, running across the lawn and streams. It was only until they were drenched in sweat and exhausted that they fell to the ground without caring about their image. Not only were their hair messy, their bodies were covered in dust and they looked wretched. At that time, the two siblings would look at one another and smile. Even if they were reprimanded by their eldest brother when they returned home, they would still enjoy it. Now that Su Zimo did that, he wanted to divert Ning's attention. Unexpectedly, she cried even more miserably and was sobbing uncontrollably. Su Zimo said gently, "Don't worry, I'm not going to die." Humph! When Yang Yu of Azure Frost Elixir Workshop heard that, she could not help but scoff coldly. Glancing sideways at Su Zimo, she said, "Do you think that you'll be able to come out alive after entering the palace?" Su Zimo's gaze swept across and a torrential malevolent aura burst forth. It was as though there was a thick stench of blood that caused one's heart to shudder. Yang Yu held her breath and swallowed the words that she was about to say. The corpses on the ground had yet to turn cold and the blood was still warm. Who would dare to provoke someone who dared to commit a massacre in the capital? Su Zimo patted Ning on the shoulder and said firmly, "Go back and wait for me. I'll come out to fetch you in a while." As though she could sense the confidence in Su Zimo's tone, Su Xiaoning stopped crying and asked softly, "Really?" "Yes." Su Zimo nodded. On the other side, Bald Vulture came before the cultivators of True Fire Elixir Workshop and said in a deep voice, "Go back now and inform the most prestigious cultivators of True Fire sect in the capital such as Elder Zhang and the others of True Fire Weapon Workshop to pay their respects to the Emperor." Understood. The cultivators of True Fire Elixir Workshop understood and turned to leave. Glancing sideways, Bald Vulture looked at Su Zimo who was not far away and sneered, "Lad, your backing is none other than Mu Dongqing. However, I'm telling you, no one can save you today." Su Zimo's expression was calm and fearless as he replied indifferently, "Don't be too sure of your words." The bearded man, Su Zimo and Bald Vulture moved and headed towards the capital, disappearing before everyone's eyes before long. If he meets the emperor, that green-robed cultivator won't be able to escape death. If the commander of the Azure Falcon Guards wants to protect that person, he'll be implicated as well. Yes, although both sides are commanders of the capital's guards, there's still True Fire Sect on the other side. If the elders and perfected beings of True Fire Sect were to step forward to apply pressure, even the Emperor of Great Zhou would have to give them some face. That's right. There's no way the Emperor of Great Zhou would offend the entire True Fire Sect for a Foundation Establishment cultivator. Haha, not everyone is Mr. M.O. able to win against the True Fire Sect in an arm wrestle. The crowd did not disperse for a long time as they discussed fervently. Mu Dongqing, where did you get that supreme-grade spirit weapon? Along the way, Bald Vulture asked in a seemingly casual manner. The bearded man remained silent. A cold glint flashed through Bald Vulture's eyes as he said coldly, "Recently, there hasn't been any news of supreme-grade spirit weapons being auctioned in Sky Treasure Auction House. However, your supreme-grade spirit weapon is actually a hammer that matches you perfectly. It's as though someone had it custom-made for you." Pausing for a moment, Bald Vulture asked slowly, "That hammer was custom-made for you by Mr. M.O., right? So what if it was? So what if it wasn't?" The bearded man turned around and asked with a fake smile. Bald Vulture declared proudly, "If you can make a recommendation for me and get Mr. M.O. to custom-make a supreme-grade spirit weapon for me as well, I'll let you off for today. Mu Dongqing, you have no chance of winning today." The moment he said that, Bald Vulture sensed something and glanced sideways. Su Zimo was looking at him with a strange expression and a hint of mockery in his eyes. That gaze was disgusting to Bald Vulture. Bald Vulture smiled sinisterly and said coldly, "Lad, when you land in my hands, I'll dig out your eyeballs first and let you look at them to your heart's content." When Su Zimo heard that, he chuckled gently. Interesting. Chapter 283. Rain Admiration Pavilion. It was an elegant place in the palace where members of the royal family would listen to and observe the rain. There was a pool of clear water in front of the pavilion with lotus flowers and leaves floating on it. Beside the pool, there were plantains and bamboos. Be it the spring rain or autumn rain, they would fall on different plants. Coupled with the different mental states of those listening to the rain, different sounds would ring in their ears and hearts with a unique charm. Not long after Su Zimo and the other two entered the palace, someone came forward and brought them here. There were only two people in the Rain Admiration Pavilion. One of them was Bai Yuhan, who had arrived first. The other person wore golden brocade robes and had shoulder-length hair. Standing in front of the window, he gazed at the skies. Although his back was facing everyone and his appearance could not be seen, there was an indescribable might that made one feel impressed. "Greetings, Your Majesty." The bearded man and bald eagle hurriedly knelt on one knee and greeted with cupped fists. Yes, the emperor's voice was deep and magnetic. Su Zimo's gaze flickered as he looked at the emperor's back view. Reporting. Right then, an imperial army soldier sprinted over and said in a deep voice, 10 elders of True Fire Weapon Workshop, True Fire Elixir Workshop request an audience. Granted. The emperor replied once more as a reply. Bald Eagle glanced sideways at the bearded man provocatively and sneered repeatedly. The bearded man was unmoved and had a calm expression. Before long, 10 perfected Jin Dan streaked through the air, and almost all of them were old men with white hair and beards. Although those Jin Dan perfected beings were from True Fire Sect, they had stayed in the capital for hundreds of years. For example, Elder Zhang of True Fire Weapon Workshop was considered the youngest among the 10 of them. The emperor did not turn back or say anything, merely gazing at the skies. Unknowingly, the skies were already filled with dark clouds and a downpour was about to happen. Nobody could figure out the thoughts of the Emperor of Great Zhou. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the Rain Admiration Pavilion turned oppressive and gloomy. Bai Yuhan stepped forward and said, "If anyone has anything to say it here. His Majesty will make the final decision." The 10 elders of True Fire Sect exchanged glances. One of them stood out and pointed at Su Zimo. This man killed wantonly in the capital with no regard for the law. Not only did he kill 2 disciples of True Fire Sect for no reason, He even killed 2 Scarlet Vulture guards. His intentions are punishable. Rumble. At this moment, there was a sudden clap of thunder. Near heavy rain poured down like torrential rain. In the pouring rain, Vulture said slowly, "Your Majesty, this person ignores the law and is no different from challenging the majesty of the Emperor. If we don't kill him, we won't be able to face the Emperor. If we don't kill him, we won't be able to appease the anger of the people. If we don't kill him, we won't be able to uphold the law of the country. Besides that, this kid has committed a heinous crime." As the Grand Commander of the Azure Falcon Guards, not only did Mu Dongqing not avoid arousing suspicion, he even stood out to protect this person and almost caused a huge battle to break out and cause the guards to kill each other. In my opinion, we should strip Mu Dongqing of his position as Grand Commander and imprison him for all eternity. Following Bald Eagle's words, the rain outside turned heavier. The raindrops fell on the banana leaf, fiercely and rapidly. There was actually a faint murderous intent that pervaded the rain-admiring pavilion. The Emperor stood with his hands behind his back, looking at the rain outside without saying anything. The rain admiration pavilion fell into a momentary silence. The atmosphere turned increasingly oppressive. After a moment, Su Zimo spoke slowly. "Everyone, there's one thing that you've missed out. He Xing was the one who attacked me first." Elder Zhang of True Fire Weapon Workshop sneered, "From what I know, He Xing merely wanted to slap you or humiliate you at most. However, you killed him." Su Zimo replied indifferently, "He didn't die in vain since he humiliated me." "Haha." Elder Zhang burst into laughter. "What a joke. What's your status? He Xing has to pay with his life just because he humiliated you? Given my status, He Xing can't touch me. If he touches me, he'll die." Su Zimo said word by word. The expressions of the 10 elders of True Fire sect changed. They could vaguely sense that Su Zimo was not joking. Bald Eagle also realized that something was amiss with the situation. The fact that Su Zimo could remain so calm in front of the Emperor meant that he had something to rely on. Based on what? Elder Zhang grit his teeth and asked. Right then, another voice sounded from the Rain Admiration Pavilion. Based on the fact that he's the #1 weapon refinement master of the Great Zhou dynasty, the owner of Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop, Mo Ling. Everyone turned towards the voice and saw the Emperor turning around slowly, revealing his true appearance. His forehead was broad and he exuded an imposing aura without anger. His eyes were bright. It was the yellow-robed man who visited Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop a few months ago. The moment he said that, apart from the bearded man, everyone present was stunned and dumbfounded. That green-robed cultivator was Mo Ling? Shouldn't Mo Ling be perfected Jin Dan? That person was only at late-stage foundation establishment. How could he refine supreme-grade spirit weapons? Elder Zhang's mind was in a mess. As a late-stage foundation establishment, how could Mo Ling have survived the assassination attempt a few months ago? If those words did not come from the Emperor's mouth, no one would believe it. Even now, everyone present was still doubtful and full of doubts. The bearded man was rather calm after knowing about Su Zimo's identity. However, a look of realization flashed through Bai Yuhan's eyes as she lamented internally. So that's your trump card. No wonder you're so calm. No matter what excuses True Fire Sect and Bald Eagle had, as long as Su Zimo revealed his identity, the situation would be reversed. Among them, the most confused person was the commander of the Scarlet Vulture Guards, Bald Eagle. How was that possible? Why did he suddenly? Bald Eagle thought of countless possibilities, but the only thing he did not expect was for the person before him to be Mo Ling. If that was the case, He Xing's attempt to humiliate the #1 weapon refinement master of the capital of Great Zhou could only be considered as asking for it and deserved to die. Unknowingly, the rain outside had stopped. The downpour came suddenly and stopped just as quickly. The Emperor looked at Su Zimo with a bright gaze and smiled. "Mr. Mo, long time no see. How have you been?" Initially, the Emperor thought that his sudden appearance would definitely shock Su Zimo. However, on the contrary, Su Zimo's expression was calm and he looked extremely calm. Su Zimo merely bowed slightly and cupped his fists. "You flatter me." The reason why he was so calm was because Su Zimo had already vaguely guessed the identity of the yellow-robed man a few months ago. Bald Eagle knew that his previous actions had already incurred the wrath of Su Zimo. At that moment, he made up his mind and said in a deep voice, "Even if you're Mo Ling and it's perfectly justifiable for you to kill He Xing, why did you kill my Scarlet Vulture guards?" Su Zimo said, "Previously, the Scarlet Vulture guards chose to turn a blind eye to He Xing and Pang Ming's lion attacks. Why is it that when it comes to me, the Scarlet Vulture guards want to kill me without a second word? Lord Commander, I even suspect that you and True Fire Sect have ulterior motives and work together to set up this trap in Yongxing City to kill me." The moment he said that, the expressions of the 10 elders of True Fire Sect and Bald Eagle changed. Su Zimo's words were akin to a battle of words and were enough to strike at their hearts. Prior to this, the Emperor of Great Zhou had clearly announced that no one was to find trouble with Mo Ling in the future. But now they had coincidentally gotten into a conflict with Mo Ling. If they could not explain it clearly, it would be easy for the Emperor of Great Zhou to misunderstand. At that time, they would be the ones to bear the wrath of the Emperor. In just a few words he had turned the situation around. Outside the Rain Admiration Pavilion, a ray of sunlight broke through the dark clouds and shone on the pond, reflecting a gorgeous glow. Chapter 284. Bald Vulture broke out in cold sweat and knelt on the ground hurriedly, saying in a deep voice, "Before this, I didn't know Mr. Mo at all, let alone set up a trap with True Fire Sect. Please investigate, Your Majesty." Elder Zhang of True Fire Weapon Workshop widened his eyes like a dead fish, as though he wanted to bite off a piece of flesh from Su Zimo. The person before him was Mo Ling, the #1 weapon refinement master of Great Zhou, who could customize supreme-grade spirit weapons? How old was that person? He was only in his 20s and True Fire Weapon Workshop had been established in the capital for thousands of years with a deep foundation. Yet, they were defeated by this young man before him. The other elders of True Fire Sect were also flustered by the news with terrified expressions. When she saw that, Bai Yuhan, the commander of the White Hawk Guards, shook her head gently and sighed internally. In reality, if the green-robed cultivator before her was an ordinary person, even if He Xing was the one who provoked him first, the Emperor would definitely side with True Fire Sect and the Scarlet Vulture Guards. That person would not be able to escape death. But now, the green-robed cultivator had an additional identity. At the very least, Mo Ling's identity was enough to go against True Fire Sect in the capital of Great Zhou. In fact, his influence for the past 2 years had even surpassed them. True Fire Sect and the Scarlet Vulture Guards had bumped into an iron plate and could only admit that they were unlucky. The Emperor pondered for a moment before declaring, "True Fire Sect was the one who bullied others and used the lion to injure others first. He Xing provoked Mr. Mo and he deserved to die on the spot. Bald Vulture, you're from True Fire Sect and can be considered half a disciple. It's clear that you're biased in this matter. Furthermore, you failed to manage your subordinates well, and failed to contain the matter within a controllable range immediately. That's your fault. If the Scarlet Vulture Guards could stand out to uphold justice after Pang Ming used the lion to injure others, Su Zimo would not have killed on the streets. It was because of the Scarlet Vulture Guards' inaction that Su Zimo was filled with killing intent when he saw Xiaoning being bullied and isolated by True Fire Elixir Workshop and Azure Frost Elixir Workshop. The Emperor continued, "Bald Vulture, you'll be punished with a year's salary and no rest. If something similar happens in the capital again, you'll be punished severely." "Thank you, Your Majesty." The Emperor waved his hand. "All right, all of you may leave. Mr. Mo, stay behind." The matter was settled and the 10 elders of True Fire Sect, Bald Vulture, the Bearded Man and Bai Yuhan left the Rain Admiration Pavilion. The 10 elders of the True Fire Sect had suffered quite a blow. Before this, True Fire Weapon Workshop had already lost a round against Mo Ling, and their reputation in the capital plummeted. But now, True Fire Elixir Workshop had coincidentally bumped into Mo Ling. The death of the Elixir Refinement Master with the greatest potential of the younger generation could be said to be a heavy loss. Mo Ling, Mo Ling. Elder Zhang gnashed his teeth in hatred. His face was gloomy, and his eyes were filled with endless resentment. In the Rain Pavilion, "Mr. Mo, what a good plan." After everyone dispersed, the Emperor looked at Su Zimo with a fake smile and said something baffling. Su Zimo's expression didn't change and he didn't answer. The Emperor smiled and changed the topic. "Mr. Mo, There's still more than a month until the sect competition. After it's over, the ancient battlefield's passageway will be opened. What are your plans? There are great opportunities in the ancient battlefield and I naturally want to explore it. At that time, I'll take part in the sect competition, Su Zimo replied. The emperor smiled. Given your capabilities, there's no need for you to take part in the sect competition. There's definitely a spot for you on the weapon ranking. How about this? During the sect competition, I'll invite you to be one of the judges. At that time, you can give pointers to the talents of the various sections. I'll leave the number 1 spot on the weapon ranking for you. After the competition, you can enter the ancient battlefield with the others. How about that? Thank you, Your Majesty. Su Zimo cupped his fists in thanks and paused for a moment before continuing. The supreme-grade spirit weapon that Your Majesty requested previously has already been refined. I'll leave it with you first. When the time comes, I'll get someone to retrieve it, the emperor said casually. Su Zimo was slightly stunned. Although he was puzzled, he did not ask. Worried about Xiaoning, Su Zimo bowed and took his leave, leaving the Rain Admiration Pavilion under the lead of the guards. Just as Su Zimo left the Rain Admiration Pavilion, a group of Imperial guards patrolled the area. The leader was clad in golden armor and had a cold expression as he surveyed the surroundings with a sharp gaze. The Golden Imperial Guard happened to catch sight of Su Zimo leaving the Rain Admiration Pavilion. Just as he was about to look away, he suddenly thought of something and his expression changed. The Golden Imperial Guard narrowed his eyes and looked in the direction of Su Zimo. Su Zimo's footsteps were extremely fast and in the blink of an eye, the Golden Imperial Guard could only see his back view. It's him? How is that possible? The Golden Imperial Guard muttered and his eyes flickered in deep thought. A few years had passed and that person had changed way too much. Logically speaking, that person did not have a spirit root and could not cultivate. If not for the familiar green robes and delicate side profile, the Golden Imperial Guard would not have connected the two of them together. The Golden Imperial Guard hesitated for a moment and a killing intent flashed through his eyes. He turned to an Imperial Guard behind him and said, "Continue patrolling. I'll head out for a while." Understood. The Imperial Guard behind him bowed and replied. The Golden Imperial Guard followed in the direction that Su Zimo left in secretly. Rain Admiration Pavilion. Not long after Su Zimo left, a refined man arrived. It was Jining Zhenjuan Mingzhe. Perfected Lord Mingzhe laughed bitterly. Seems like Mo Ling has truly guessed your identity previously. Otherwise he wouldn't have been so calm today. Interesting. To think that he would want to make use of my influence to break the situation. The Emperor smiled as well and asked, "What's the name of the woman from Azure Frost sect who was injured by the spirit lion?" Perfected Lord Mingzhe replied, "I heard that her name is Su Xiaoning and she refers to Mo Ling as his sister. Her background is unknown and no one has heard her mention it before. However, according to the other disciples, this woman is rather close to the third princess in Azure Frost sect." The Emperor frowned. Perfected Lord Mingzhe analyzed. There are two possibilities for their surnames being different. Firstly, Mo Ling's surname is Su. Secondly, Su Xiaoning is his sister. However, no matter which possibility it is, it proves that Su Xiaoning is extremely important to Mo Ling. The Emperor nodded and his eyes shone with a wise glint as he said slowly, "On the surface, He Xing's death was due to He Xing attacking first to teach Mo Ling a lesson. However, in reality, it was clear that Mo Ling wanted to stand up for his sister and lured He Xing into attacking first. That was the reason why he killed on the streets. That's right. That He Xing was foolish and did not understand the situation clearly. If he really wanted to teach Mo Ling a lesson, he would have lost his life instead." Perfected Lord Mingzhe shook his head and lamented. The Emperor said leisurely, "I've pointed out something to him earlier on. I believe he understands." Perfected Lord Mingzhe said, "Yes, the fact that Your Majesty did not expose his intentions in front of everyone is a huge favor for him. As for Su Xiaoning's identity, the third princess might know something." Yes, the Emperor nodded. Shui will be back soon as well. Chapter 285. Azure Frost Elixir Workshop. A few female cultivators gathered around Su Xiaoning with excited expressions. Their eyes burned with the flames of gossip as they chattered non-stop. Xiaoning, is that person really your brother? Why haven't I heard you mention him before? What's his name? How old is he? Which sect is he from? Does he have a Dao companion? Why didn't he join Azure Frost's sect with you? Xiaoning, look at how close you guys are. Are you his Dao companion? Su Xiaoning frowned slightly and pursed her lips in silence, her eyes filled with worry. Seeing that Su Xiaoning was in low spirits, someone consoled her. Xiaoning, don't be too anxious. It's only been 2 hours. It's still early. I'd advise you to give up. Right then, a female cultivator walked out from the back hall with a murderous look on her face. It was the senior sister of many female cultivators, Yang Yu. Yang Yu sneered, he killed 4 people consecutively in the capital, and you're still hoping that he can make it out alive? Dream on. Su Xiaoning took a deep breath and said firmly, my brother promised me that he would definitely come and fetch me. How naive. Yang Yu did not hide the mockery in her eyes. Of the 4 people killed, 2 were disciples of True Fire Elixir Workshop, and the other 2 were Scarlet Vulture Guards. Do you think that True Fire Sect and the Scarlet Vulture Guards are pushovers? Who do you think your brother is to be able to fight against those 2 factions? With every sentence that Yang Yu said, Su Xiaoning's face turned paler. She knew in her heart that the chances of Su Zimo making it out of the capital alive were extremely low. However, she was willing to believe in Su Zimo. Yang Yu changed the topic. However, you can't be too full of yourself. In the capital, there are people who have the strength to fight against True Fire Sect and the Scarlet Vulture Guards. For example, Yang Yu purposely kept Su Xiaoning in suspense and waited for her to look expectant before saying slowly, for example, your brother is from the royal family, Fufu. Before she finished, Yang Yu laughed out loud with a mocking look in her eyes. She was completely teasing Su Xiaoning. If Su Zimo was a member of the royal family, how could the commander of the Scarlet Vulture Guards not recognize him? Yang Yu continued, of course, other than the royal family, there's another person in the capital who has enough power to go against True Fire Sect and the Scarlet Vulture Guards. That is, Su Xiaoning knew that Yang Yu was teasing her, but she still had a glimmer of hope. She looked at Yang Yu, waiting for an answer. That is, the #1 weapon refinement master of the Great Zhou dynasty, Mr. Mo. Yang Yu said. Su Xiaoning's eyes dimmed. Yang Yu chuckled and said, let me think. Junior sister Su, could your brother be Mr. Mo? That's not right. Your surname is Su, and Mr. Mo's surname is Mo. There seems to be a bit of a difference. And I heard that Mr. Mo is a Taoist master. Jin Dan. Your brother seems to be in the late stage of the foundation establishment realm, hehe. Su Xiaoning said, senior sister Yang, you don't have to be sarcastic. I believe in my brother. He'll definitely return alive. Ha! Yang Yu sneered. If your brother can return alive, Yang Yu. After Yang Yu said that, she glanced over and caught sight of a figure walking over. He was dressed in green robes and had delicate features, walking into the hall slowly. All the cultivators in the hall were stunned on the spot, dumbfounded and shocked. How is that possible? Yang Yu's mind was in a mess when she looked at the person who had arrived. This person, who was already dead in her heart, was standing right in front of her, alive and kicking. Su Zimo glared at Yang Yu coldly. Continue. What are you going to do if I return alive, huh? Yang Yu felt flustered when Su Zimo glared at her with a sharp gaze. Instinctively, she turned her head away, not daring to meet his gaze as her heart palpitated for no reason. Brother! Su Xiaoning exclaimed with a face filled with joy. Like a swallow returning to its nest, she dove into Su Zimo's embrace and sobbed softly. A gentle look appeared in Su Zimo's eyes as he patted Xiaoning's back gently. Su Zimo supported Xiaoning to the side and walked towards Yang Yu slowly. His expression was cold and his gaze was sharp as a knife, exuding a chilling, killing intent. What are you trying to do? This is Azure Frost Elixir Workshop. You're not allowed to act brazenly here. Yang Yu was a little flustered as she hollered fiercely. However, she was retreating instinctively. I even dare to kill in the capital. Do you think that I won't dare to kill in Azure Frost Elixir Workshop? Su Zimo continued approaching with a cold gaze. Yang Yu swallowed a mouthful of saliva as her heart grew increasingly flustered and terrified. Although she was at perfected foundation establishment and was a level higher than Su Zimo, She was completely intimidated by Su Zimo's aura at that moment. Who wouldn't be afraid of someone who dared to go on a killing spree in the capital, and even walked out of the palace unscathed? Even perfected being Jean Dan of Azure Frost sect was wary, let alone Yang Yu. Without knowing Su Zimo's identity, no one dared to touch him. Someone who could survive the combined suppression of True Fire sect and the Scarlet Vulture Guards must have an extremely high status. Who would dare to touch him? Before long, Yang Yu was already leaning against the wall with nowhere to retreat. Do you know why the four of them died? Su Zimo came before Yang Yu and asked with a narrowed gaze. Yang Yu's face was pale as she shook her head. Su Zimo said slowly, "That's because they bullied Xiaoning. Furthermore, you bullied her as well." I didn't. Yang Yu's explanation was so weak. Su Zimo changed the topic. "However, don't worry, I won't kill you." When she heard that, Yang Yu heaved a long sigh of relief as though she had been pardoned. Unknowingly, her back was already drenched in sweat. A playful look flashed through Su Zimo's eyes as he smiled. "The reason why I won't kill you is because someone else will." Yang Yu's heart that had just calmed down started pounding once more. Right then, Su Xiaoning ran over and pulled Su Zimo away. She looked at Yang Yu and said, "Senior Sister Yang, does the deal we agreed on previously still count? I'll sell this elixir furnace to you, and you'll give me 5,000 superior-grade spirit stones or a superior-grade spirit weapon." With that, Su Xiaoning took out an elixir furnace from her storage bag. This elixir furnace was the reason why He Xing of True Fire sect coveted it and caused a series of conflicts. After being soaked in Xiaoning's blood, the elixir furnace was already extraordinary. Furthermore, Su Zimo could tell that Xiaoning was extremely fond of this elixir furnace. Why was she selling it now? "Xiaoning, why are you selling this furnace?" Su Zimo asked in confusion. Su Xiaoning said seriously, "Brother, I noticed that you've been empty-handed the entire time. I'm sure you don't have a suitable spirit weapon. If I sell this furnace, I'll have the money to customize a superior-grade spirit weapon for you." Su Zimo's heart warmed as he rubbed Xiaoning's head lovingly and smiled. "Hurry and put away the furnace." Su Zimo said in a serious manner, "Xiaoning, let me tell you. The reason why I'm empty-handed is not because I don't have any spirit weapons. It's because I have too many, bragging again. Let's go. I'll bring you to my place to take a look." Su Zimo ignored Yang Yu and left True Fire Elixir Workshop with Xiaoning. Chapter 286. By the time they left Azure Frost Elixir Workshop, it was already evening and there were fewer people on the streets. The siblings had not seen each other for a few years and naturally had a lot to talk about. Senior Sister Yang even said that only people from the royal family or Mr. Mo can return safely. So my brother can do it too. She's not wrong about that. That's because I'm Mr. Mo. I don't believe you. Su Zimo smiled and did not explain, leading Xiaoning straight to Mo's spirit weapon workshop. Before long, the two of them arrived at the entrance of Mo's spirit weapon workshop. Under Su Xiaoning's confused gaze, Su Zimo knocked on the door of Mo's spirit weapon workshop. Before long, a stunning young girl with yellow hair popped her head out. It was Nianqi. "Young master." When Nianqi caught sight of Su Zimo, her face was filled with joy as she called out crisply, "Yes." Su Zimo nodded and pushed Xiaoning over. "This is my sister. You guys can chat. I have something else to do and we'll be back later." "Alright, don't worry, young master." Nianqi nodded obediently. Su Xiaoning's mouth was agape as she stared at the words Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop on the beam. For a moment, she could not connect Su Zimo with the famous Mr. Mo in the capital. It was only after Su Zimo left and Su Xiaoning was brought to the courtyard by Nianqi in a daze that she gradually regained her senses. "Is my brother really Mr. Mo?" Su Xiaoning looked at Nianqi and asked carefully. "That's right." Nianqi pointed to the big black dog sprawled at the side and smiled. "His name is Night Spirit and he's Young Master's spirit beast." The name Mo Ling was derived from the names of both Young Master and Night Spirit. Night Spirit opened its eyes and glanced at Su Xiaoning indifferently. It did not move and continued to rest. Nianqi smiled. "Night Spirit is like that. Apart from Young Master, it's not close to anyone else. Don't be fooled by its lazy appearance usually. When it's angry it's really scary." The two of them were about the same age and quickly became familiar with each other. After Dai-Su followed the green-robed cultivator out of the capital, he removed his armor and changed into a common robe. He hid in the crowd and followed far behind. Ultimately, he could not be sure that the person he was following was the same man he saw in town a few years ago. After all, the man in the small town was only a mortal who could not cultivate. As for this green-robed man, his cultivation had already reached late-stage foundation establishment. Furthermore, there was no reason for that person to appear in Royal City, let alone in the royal palace. How was that? Everything. If they were the same person, there was no. But for some reason, although it was just a quick glance, Dai-Su had a strong feeling in his heart. They were the same person. Although that person looked like a frail scholar, his spine was upright at all times, as though nothing in the world could crush him. Dai-Su followed behind the green-robed cultivator, and saw him enter Azure Frost Elixir Workshop. Not long after, the green-robed cultivator walked out with another female cultivator. When he saw the female cultivator's face, Dai-Su no longer had any doubts. The green-robed cultivator was the scholar from that unassuming town in the vassal state back then, Su Zimo. The woman beside him was his younger sister, Su Xiaoning. Back then, she was taken away by the third princess and joined Azure Frost's sect to cultivate. Dai-Su continued to follow Su Zimo. When he saw Su Xiaoning being sent to Mo's spirit weapon workshop, Dai-Su's eyes flickered in deep thought. Su Zimo and Mo Ling. Immediately after Su Zimo left. By the looks of it, he was heading out of the city. Looking at Su Zimo's back view, Dai-Su's expression flickered. After pondering for a moment, a killing intent flashed through his eyes and he followed silently. The two of them left the city one after another. After leaving the capital, Su Zimo summoned his flying sword and rode it into the distance. Dai-Su followed hurriedly. Before long, Su Zimo entered a dense forest. Su Zimo retracted his flying sword and darted through the forest at an extremely fast speed, as though he was extremely familiar with the place. Turning left and right, his position was erratic. After all, they were in the forest and could not see as clearly as outside. There were too many places to hide and there were blind spots everywhere. Dai-Su had no choice but to slow down on his flying sword. Before long, Su Zimo disappeared from Dai-Su's sight. Dai-Su chased to the place where Su Zimo disappeared and surveyed his surroundings with a grim expression. At that moment, the night was getting darker and the moon was above the willow branches. The beasts in the forest had already started coming out of their caves. The forest was dark and the roars of spirit beasts could be heard from time to time. At other times, the leaves rustled and the air was filled with the stench of blood, eerie and terrifying. Dai-Su felt uneasy and took out his golden armor. The moment he put it on, his heart skipped a beat and he turned around. Not far behind him, a green-robed cultivator stood with his hands behind his back. The cold moonlight shone through the dense leaves and landed on his face. The green-robed cultivator had a calm expression with a hint of mockery in his eyes. Su Zimo. Dai-Su narrowed his eyes and said word by word. Su Zimo smiled gently. Commander Dai, how have you been? After a few years you've changed quite a bit. Truly impressive. Dai-Su smirked and said coldly, back then you were just a mere mortal. Now you're already at late-stage foundation establishment. Not bad, not bad. Su Zimo replied with a fake smile. I have to thank you for not killing me back then, Commander Dai. Humph. When he heard that, Dai-Su harumphed coldly. If not for the fact that Su Zimo was tactful and did not get too close to Ji Yaoshua, Dai-Su would have died a few years ago. Although Dai-Su hid it well back then, Su Zimo, who possessed spirit perception, sensed Dai-Su's killing intent. Commander Dai, why have you followed me all the way here? Su Zimo asked straightforwardly. Su Zimo, if you're smart enough, you should stay away from the capital and the third princess. Dai-Su said slowly with a murderous expression. Now that you've appeared in the capital, I can only say that you have a death wish. As he said that, Dai-Su withdrew a flying sword from his storage bag. Su Zimo smiled. Commander Dai, you're not telling the truth. Dai-Su did not say anything. Su Zimo continued. That's not the only reason why you want to kill me. It's also because you've guessed my identity and want to kill me for my treasures, right? Haha. Dai-Su reared his head in laughter. You're smart. However, you're still going to die today. Su Zimo raised his brows slightly and asked instead, "When I left the palace, I already discovered that you were following me. However, do you know why I chose to leave the city directly? You wanted to hunt me down." Dai Su laughed. "Su Zimo, you were confident enough to lure me into this sparsely populated forest to hunt me down. I had the same intentions as well." Su Zimo nodded. "That's right." Dai Su said coldly, "There's nothing much to say then. Let's see how much you've improved in the past few years." Chapter 287. This time round, both of them were filled with killing intent. Furthermore, both of them were confident that they could kill the other party. That was the reason why Su Zimo lured Dai Su out of the capital. Even though Dai Su knew that Su Zimo was doing it on purpose, he chased after him fearlessly as well. The two of them were each other's prey. The only thing that mattered was who had the stronger methods. Channeling his spirit energy, Dai Su's body shone with a bright light as a spirit meridian appeared, emitting a bedazzling glow. "You're only at late-stage foundation establishment, while I'm a meridian cultivator. What are you going to use to fight me?" Sneering coldly, Dai Su channeled his spirit energy and the flying sword in his hands buzzed as 3 spirit patterns shone. Superior grade spirit weapon. Shoo! A sword beam tore through the void and sped towards Su Zimo. At the same time, Dai Su waved his sleeves and conjured hand seals. He hollered and pointed forward. Roar! A deafening roar sounded out of nowhere. A spirit demon formed from spirit energy appeared in the void. With a menacing expression, it reared its head and roared into the skies, emitting a shocking killing intent as it charged towards Su Zimo. The flying sword and spirit art arrived at the same time. Su Zimo's expression was unchanged as he interlocked his thumb and middle finger, forming a strange hand seal before pushing it forward slowly. Fiend suppression seal. There was no probing. The moment he attacked, Su Zimo released the strongest spirit art he had learned. The spirit energy in his dantian surged wildly into the hand seal that Su Zimo conjured. Boom! Accompanied by a loud bang, a gigantic golden palm descended from the skies. It tore through the firmaments and crushed the air currents, crushing towards the spirit demon and flying sword in a terrifying manner. Dai Su's expression changed. He could clearly see that the gigantic golden palm seemed to be formed from spirit energy. However, it was corporeal, as though it was the palm of a god that had descended from the heavens to suppress all evil in the world. Bang! In mid-air, the ferocious roaring spirit demon collided with the giant golden palm. Immediately, cracks appeared on its body. In the blink of an eye, it dissipated in midair. Dai Su's expression changed. Under normal circumstances, given his spirit energy of a single meridian foundation establishment, the spirit art he conjured would definitely be able to defeat a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator with ease. But now the situation was exactly the opposite. There was only one possibility. His opponent's spirit art was extremely powerful, far more powerful than his own. In midair, Dai Su's flying sword was pressed against the center of the giant golden palm, unable to move an inch. Moreover, the sword was trembling and bending. Its spiritual energy was unstable and showed signs of collapsing. It seemed that it would not be able to hold on any longer. Dai Su sneered, and the spiritual energy in his body began to circulate again. Whoosh! Another beam of spiritual light shot out from Dai Su's golden armor. 2 spiritual veins. The spirit-peering art would not be able to detect how many meridians a foundation establishment cultivator had opened unless the cultivator revealed it himself. But now Dai Su had already revealed 2 spirit meridians. Spiritual energy surged in the 2 spiritual veins with a majestic aura. Dai Su controlled the flying sword, causing it to shine brightly as its strength rose rapidly. The sword's blade was straight and sharp as it blocked the gigantic golden palm. No matter how strong the fiend's suppression seal was, there was a limit to it and it could not make up for the difference in their cultivation realms. Su Zimo, if that's all you're capable of, this day next year will be the anniversary of your death. The fact that Dai Su could still divert his attention to speak in such an intense clash of strength was proof that he still had some strength left. Su Zimo did not reply and had a calm expression. Dai Su was not using his full strength and Su Zimo had a backup plan as well. Break! Right then, another beam of spiritual light shone from Dai Su's body as he hollered. A 3rd spirit meridian. The power of 3 spirit meridians burst forth at the same time, and the flying sword in midair shone brightly. Both parties were in a stalemate for a moment. With a poof, the flying sword pierced through the gigantic golden palm and did not stop, piercing towards Su Zimo's head. The moment Dai Su revealed his 3rd spirit meridian, Su Zimo had already realized that it would be difficult for him to kill Dai Su given his cultivation realm and immortal cultivation methods. The gigantic golden palm was pierced and cracks appeared on its surface. It was about to collapse. Shoo! The sword beam was piercingly cold and came at an extremely fast speed. However, Su Zimo's reaction was even faster. Almost at the same moment the flying sword pierced through the gigantic golden palm, Su Zimo moved and left his original spot, leaving behind a series of afterimages. Swoosh! Like a ferocious horse, Su Zimo arrived in front of Dai Su in almost the blink of an eye. After using Divine Steed Fleeting, Su Zimo changed his move at the last minute. He took a huge step forward and used the stance of Plow Heaven Stride. Boom! The moment he took a step forward, the earth quaked and the mountains shook. Su Zimo's aura surged. Su Zimo's eyes lit up and shone with a maniacal killing intent. He suddenly reached out with both hands and grabbed Dai Su's arms. Then he bent his knees and charged forward. Divine Steed Dismemberment. With the burst of Divine Steed Fleeting, he shortened the distance and closed in. With the help of Plow Heaven Stride, he released a soaring aura. Coupled with Divine Steed Dismemberment, the entire process was as smooth as flowing water without any sluggishness. As long as Dai Su's arms were locked down by Su Zimo, he would definitely die. The burst of Divine Steed Fleeting and Plow Heaven Stride, coupled with the power of Divine Steed Dismemberment, was enough to rip Dai Su into pieces. Against Su Zimo's storm-like attacks, a look of panic flashed through Dai Su's eyes. However, he calmed down instantly. Ah! Dai Su roared and the spirit light on the surface of his body shone once more. Boom! The 4th spirit meridian appeared. The 5th. The 6th. In the blink of an eye, 6 spirit meridians appeared on the surface of Dai Su's body. Dai Su's aura surged and his spirit energy was rich as he entered a berserk state. 6 Meridian Foundation Establishment. There were not many Foundation Establishment cultivators who could unlock 6 spirit meridians out of the 8 extraordinary meridians. Furthermore, not every meridian had the same difficulty. The further one went, the harder it was. Unless one entered the ancient battlefield and obtained an even greater opportunity, unlocking 6 meridians was almost the limit in Tianhuang mainland. Initially, Dai Su did not use his full strength. That was because in his opinion, Su Zimo was only at late-stage foundation establishment and his cultivation realm was far inferior to his. There was no need for him to do so. The outcome of this battle was already decided. But now, after Su Zimo released such a domineering attack, Dai Su realized that this battle was not as simple as he had imagined. The spirit energy of all 6 meridians burst forth instantly. You must have a death wish. Dai Su's gaze was ferocious as he clasped his hands in front of him, forming a gigantic ball of spirit energy that blocked in front of Su Zimo. The ball of spirit energy contained almost all of Dai Su's strength and was not to be underestimated. Su Zimo narrowed his eyes. If Dai Su was only at 3 or even 4 Meridian Foundation establishment, Su Zimo was confident that he could kill the latter with the burst of his physique. But now that Dai Su had released the power of 6 Meridian Foundation establishment, Su Zimo could not take him head-on with just his physique alone. At that moment, the combination of Divine Steed Fleeting and Plow Heaven Stride caused Su Zimo's momentum to be too ferocious, and it was too late for him to change his move. Channeling the bloodline. Rumble. Splash. A terrifying sound echoed from Su Zimo's body. It sounded like rumbling thunder and surging tides with a terrifying might. Chapter 288. The blood was like a tide, and the sound was like thunder. At that moment, Su Zimo, who was charging over, resembled a divine steed shimmering with lightning with a tsunami behind him. Boom! Su Zimo's knee collided against Dai Su's ball of spirit energy with a deafening bang. A gigantic halo of spirit energy burst forth from the center of the collision in a bedazzling manner, illuminating the surroundings as though it was daytime. The ball of light exploded and a berserk spirit energy was released. The spirit energy of a 6 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator was extremely dense, and Su Zimo's body was repelled instantly, flipping a few times in midair before landing on the ground slowly. Dai Su staggered a few steps back and his feet sank deep into the mud before he managed to stabilize himself. They were evenly matched. This was a head-on clash without much technique involved. The spirit energy of a 6 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator was completely capable of going against the power of bloodline released by Su Zimo. Although Su Zimo had killed a perfected Jindan personally on that night a few months ago, he knew that neither he nor Night Spirit would be a match for perfected Jindan in a one-on-one fight. The reason why Su Zimo lured Dai Su here was partly because he wanted to kill the latter. At the same time, Su Zimo wanted to see how strong his demonic cultivation was, and what cultivation realm he could go up against. To put it simply, Su Zimo viewed Dai Su as a whetstone. With that single clash just now, Su Zimo understood. Now that he had attained greater mastery of the organ's refinement section, the power he could release with his bloodline was enough to take on a 6 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivator head-on without being disadvantaged. Dai Su retrieved an elixir with his left hand and swallowed it. Controlling his flying sword with his right hand, he glared at Su Zimo and panted slightly. Although Dai Su looked calm on the surface, his heart was surging with stormy waves. Initially, he had thought that Su Zimo was only at late-stage Foundation establishment. Given his 6 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivation, killing Su Zimo would be as easy as killing a chicken. But now Dai Su suddenly realized that Su Zimo's real trump card was his extremely terrifying physical body and close combat strength. Blood like a tidal wave? This was an illusory realm in the legends. How could someone really cultivate it? Even ancient ferocious beasts might not be able to successfully cultivate it, right? The pill that he had just swallowed had already turned into a rich spiritual energy that surged between the 6 spirit veins, replenishing the spiritual energy that he had consumed earlier. Whoosh! Dai Su was the first to make a move. He pointed his finger forward and the flying sword turned into a streak of rainbow light and sped away. In a flash, Su Zimo avoided the flying sword by a hair's breadth. Ta! Ta! In just a few steps, Su Zimo had already arrived in front of Dai Su. Dai Su's expression was unchanged as he conjured a hand seal, conjuring a spirit energy sword in front of him and stabbing towards Su Zimo's face in reverse. At the same time, the superior grade flying sword that was initially in midair turned around and arrived behind Su Zimo. Break it! Roaring, Su Zimo's bloodline surged as he swung his arm, drawing a semicircle in midair. Using his fist as a seal, he slammed down heavily against the incoming spirit energy sword. Snap! A crack appeared on the spirit energy sword and extended rapidly, covering the entire sword. Dai Su shuddered and a look of shock flashed through his eyes. At the same time, Su Zimo did not even turn back or look. Instead, he twitched his arm in reverse and placed it gently on the incoming flying sword like an elephant's trunk. One coil and one tremble. The spirit energy on the superior grade flying sword dissipated and in the blink of an eye, it landed in Su Zimo's palm. Swash! Without stopping, Su Zimo snatched the superior grade flying sword and stabbed it towards Dai Su's head. Ah! Exclaiming, Dai Su exerted strength in his legs and leaped up. Clang! The superior grade flying sword struck Dai Su's armor in front of his chest. The golden armor on Dai Su's body shone with 3 spirit patterns and released a strong defensive power. The flying sword merely pierced through it and found it difficult to advance any further. It was a superior grade defensive armor. Dai Su had a horrified expression and broke out in cold sweat. Just now, even though they had only exchanged a single blow, he would have been a dead man if not for the golden armor on his body. Kill! Dai Su hollered and conjured a spirit art with both hands, sending it towards Su Zimo who was right in front of him. Bang! Bang! Waving his fists, Su Zimo dispersed the incoming spirit energy with 2 punches and paused for a moment. Dai Su took advantage of the collision of the 2 forces and retreated rapidly. He took out a flying sword and leaped into the air, speeding in the direction of Royal City. Realizing that he was not a match for Su Zimo, Dai Su made a prompt decision and chose to escape without hesitation. There was no way Su Zimo would allow Dai Su to return alive as he chased after him. The 2 of them shuttled through the forest in pursuit, alarming countless birds and beasts. Gritting his teeth, Dai Su circulated the spirit energy in his dantian furiously. It was almost at its limits and even his dantian was aching. He knew that he would definitely die if Su Zimo caught up to him. The difference in their cultivation realms was not small and there was a huge difference in the speed of sword kinesis flight as well. As long as he could leave this forest, Su Zimo would not be able to catch up to him no matter what methods he had. Su Zimo shuttled through the forest and his bloodline surged endlessly. At the same time he was already at his limits and was getting closer to Dai Su. Su Zimo's gaze was calm as he glared at Dai Su's back view coldly. The edge of the forest was not far ahead. He had to kill Dai Su before the latter escaped from the forest. A demonic glint shone in Su Zimo's eyes as he reared his head and howled. Suddenly an extremely terrifying aura burst forth from his body and filled the forest. It was enough to make all beasts bow down. This was something even more terrifying than the power of bloodline. The power of blood chi. Within the scarlet fog, Su Zimo's figure was faintly discernible. His eyes were pitch black like ink and he was like a peerless demon that walked in the darkness, chasing after prey that was not far away. Suddenly Dai Su felt his heart skip a beat. It was as though he was being targeted by an ancient ferocious beast. His scalp tingled as though there were thorns on his back. Instinctively Dai Su turned back. Shrouded by the scarlet demonic chi, a tall figure shuttled through the forest. With the burst of his physique, he bounced between the ancient trees at an extremely fast speed. Almost in the blink of an eye, the figure had already arrived beneath him. Boom! The figure stomped on the ground with both feet and a tremendous force tore the ground apart, creating two dark cracks. With the burst of his physique, the figure soared into the air and reached a height of around 100 feet. A shadow loomed over. The next moment, Dai Su's pupils constricted and he felt his limbs turn cold. You are. The moment Dai Su said that word, a fair palm had already landed on his throat and grabbed fiercely. Against Su Zimo's palm, Dai Su's throat was as fragile as tofu and was crushed into pieces. Fresh blood splattered through the air. With a sweep of his palm, Su Zimo took away the storage bag on Dai Su's waist and descended. By the time he landed on the ground, the demonic chi around Su Zimo had already vanished completely, and the blood chi within his body was calm, returning to normal. Before long, under the hazy night sky, a green-robed cultivator left the forest and sped towards the capital. Peace returned to the forest once more. Chapter 289. By the time Su Zimo returned to Mo's spirit weapon workshop, it was already late at night. Su Zimo landed gently in the courtyard and twitched his ears to listen carefully. Two steady breaths could be heard from Nian Chi's room. In the darkness, a pitch-black figure walked out silently like a ghost. It was Night Spirit. Su Zimo's expression relaxed and he was relieved. As long as Night Spirit was still around, it meant that Nian Chi and Xiaoning were fine. The two of them must have already fallen asleep. Today, Xiaoning had experienced many things. Initially, she could have refined a perfect spirit regeneration elixir in the elixir battle with He Xing. However, she was ambushed and failed. Later on, she was surrounded by cultivators from True Fire Elixir Workshop and Azure Frost Elixir Workshop, and was alone and helpless. Right after, she met Su Zimo. Later on, Su Zimo killed someone on the streets and was brought to the palace. At that time, Xiaoning was worried about Su Zimo's safety until he returned safe and sound. This kind of emotional roller coaster ride was the most exhausting for a person's spirit. Su Zimo did not wake the two of them up and returned to his room. He assumed a lotus position and closed his eyes in deep contemplation. Today, he was reunited with Xiaoning and was received by the emperor. He believed that it wouldn't be long before the emperor guessed that Mo Ling was Su Zimo. In reality, the reason why the emperor was unable to guess this was mainly because in the emperor's understanding, Su Zimo was merely a mortal who could not cultivate. However, Mo Ling was a foundation establishment cultivator, and the #1 weapon refinement master of the Great Zhou dynasty. One of them was buried in the soil while the other sat on the clouds. The difference was too great. Of course, there was no way he could hide this identity, and it would definitely be exposed during the sect competition. Su Zimo was indifferent towards this matter, and would just let nature take its course. The night passed silently. The next morning, Ning gets up early. She wants to see if Su Zimo has come back. As soon as he walked out of the door, he saw Su Zimo already sitting in the courtyard, drinking fragrant tea brewed by the morning dew, looking happy and content. Brother, I'm sorry. I fell asleep last night. Last night, Ning wanted to wait for Su Zimo to come back. But she couldn't stand the tiredness and fell asleep. So what? Su Zimo smiled and pointed to the stone stool next to him. Have a seat and talk to me. Yes. Xiaoning sat down and took the fragrant tea from Su Zimo. She took a small sip and the fragrance assailed her nostrils. She felt all the pores on her body open up. When did you come to Royal City? Su Zimo asked. I've been here for almost a year. Ning says I asked for it. Sister Yaoshua and the others haven't come yet. At that point, Ning purposely paused and looked up at Su Zimo's expression. Su Zimo lowered his head and sipped his tea. His expression was calm, as though he didn't hear anything and didn't react at all. Ning had no choice but to continue. I thought that I could kill two birds with one stone. Not only can I help others refine elixirs, I can also hone my core formation skills. Su Zimo asked again, why did you think of becoming an elixir refinement master? Ning's spirit root was only a pseudo-spirit root. Even if she didn't divert her attention to learning how to refine elixirs, she might not be able to reach Jindan realm successfully. Su Zimo could not understand why Ning would choose to become an elixir refinement master under such circumstances. Ning sighed gently, suddenly feeling a little dejected. After a moment she said slowly, among the three of us, only brother can't cultivate. I'm afraid that brother will leave us one day. Su Zimo remained silent. There were countless nights when he thought of this question and had the same worries. If he and Ning could form their cores, Su Hong's lifespan would only be slightly more than 100 years and he would definitely be ahead of them. Perhaps no one would be able to understand the kinship between the three of them. Even though Su Zimo and Xiaoning were already on the path of cultivation, they still had a deep sense of dependence and attachment towards Su Hong in the depths of their hearts. Back then, if not for Su Hong, the two of them would not have survived. Ever since Su Zimo and Ning could remember, they had never met their parents. In their hearts, Su Hong was like their parent. Ning said in a daze, I know that we'll have to go through all of this eventually and experience the separation of life and death. However, I want that moment to come later. I heard that some incredible elixir refinement masters can refine elixirs that can extend one's lifespan. That's why I want to give it a try. Even if it's a year, a month, or a day longer, it'll be good. Su Zimo was moved. Reaching out, he hugged the teary-eyed Ning gently in his embrace without saying anything. Most cultivators cultivated the Tao for the sake of longevity and foresight. Su Zimo had never heard of elixirs that could extend one's lifespan. Even if such an elixir formula existed in this world, the requirements to refine it would be unimaginably harsh. However, despite knowing that, Ning still chose to embark on the path of an elixir refinement master. Even if such an elixir only existed in legends, she had to give it a try for the sake of that tiny bit of hope in her heart. Suddenly, Su Zimo understood something. It was not a coincidence that Ning had such achievements in elixir refinement. This kind of obsession was not something that everyone possessed. A moment later, Su Zimo asked again, what's up with that elixir furnace of yours? Xiaoning stood up and took out the exquisite and quaint elixir furnace. Placing it on the table, she said, I saw it at a stall in Yongxing City. At that time, I didn't think much of it. It just looked rather old and there was nothing special about it. However, when I picked it up, I had an inexplicable feeling. Therefore, I bought it and He-Shing of True Fire Elixir Workshop happened to see it. Su Zimo looked at the elixir furnace in deep thought. Ning continued, later on, when I brought this elixir furnace with me to refine elixirs, I realized something different. As long as I bring this elixir furnace with me, my mental energy will be extremely focused when I refine elixirs. Unless something major happens, it's hard for me to be distracted. Realization dawned on Su Zimo. It was no wonder why Ning was in a perfect state and focused state during the elixir battle yesterday. So, this mysterious elixir furnace played a part in that. Put it away. Su Zimo instructed. No matter what, don't give this elixir furnace to anyone else. Keep it for yourself. I have a feeling that this elixir furnace has a great background. It could affect a person's mental state with just an inanimate object. Even with Su Zimo's capabilities, He could not refine an elixir furnace as such. Yes. Ning nodded. Su Zimo pondered for a moment before continuing. From today onwards, you'll cultivate here with me first. You can return when the sect competition is around. Many things had happened yesterday, and Su Zimo was truly worried about Ning staying in Azure Frost Elixir Workshop. Furthermore, Su Zimo intended to make use of the final month to help Ning raise her cultivation realm. Ning had a pseudo-spirit root and her cultivation speed was the slowest. Therefore, Su Zimo drew some support formations for Ning that could help her absorb spirit chi better. All of them were superior-grade spirit stones. Most perfected Jindan cultivators only use superior-grade spirit stones for their cultivation. However, Su Zimo's plan was simple. He was going to use superior-grade spirit stones. That was because he did not lack spirit stones the most right now. Chapter 290. As the time for the sect competition approached, the number of cultivators that arrived in the capital gradually increased and major sects had already led their disciples here. Among them Iridescent Clouds Palace, True Fire Sect, Azure Frost Sect and Southern Mountain Sect of the 5 major sects had already sent perfected Jindan to the capital. Although they were also part of the 5 major sects, Misty Peak had yet to send any disciples. Many cultivators had expected this to happen. 3 years ago, news of the battle at Dongling Valley spread and everyone heard about it. It was said that the battle was extremely tragic and almost all of the Paragon disciples of Misty Peak at Foundation Establishment Realm were killed. In fact, Misty Peak even lost a few perfected Jindan disciples. It was almost impossible to nurture Foundation Establishment cultivators that were qualified to compete for the spirit ranking within 3 years. Prior to this, Misty Peak could take up at least 3 of the 10 spots on the spirit ranking. But now, Misty Peak had already lost the qualifications to compete for the spirit ranking that they had the most advantage over. However, no Misty Peak disciple had ever left their names on the elixir and weapon rankings. Misty Peak only had a slight chance of making it on the talisman ranking. However, it was still extremely slim. Therefore, to everyone, it was even possible that Misty Peak would choose to give up on the sect competition. Palace, Rain Admiration Pavilion. A man and woman stood side by side. The man wore long yellow robes and had his hands behind his back. His forehead was wide and his gaze was wise. He was the emperor of the Great Zhou dynasty. The woman beside him was wearing a light yellow dress that trailed along the ground. A ribbon was tied around her waist, perfectly accentuating her exquisite figure. She was extremely beautiful and had a graceful and elegant aura. She was the 3rd princess of the Great Zhou dynasty, and the daughter of the Emperor Ji Yaoshua. Why didn't you come back earlier? The emperor asked. Ji Yaoshua lowered her head in silence. Frowning slightly, the emperor glanced sideways and asked, "Are you still blaming me? I wouldn't dare." Ji Yaoshua shook her head gently and said calmly. The emperor sighed helplessly. "Shurer, you have to know that I will definitely not harm you. If there's anyone in this world who's wholeheartedly for your good, it's me. I know. Father, you must be doing this for my own good." Ji Yaoshua turned around and looked at the emperor with an indifferent gaze. "However, I've already grown up, and there are many things that I wish to decide for myself. How are you going to make your own decision? Do you really want to become Dao companions with a mortal?" The emperor frowned as he looked at the stubborn Ji Yaoshua. Suddenly, he felt enraged and could not help but raise his voice. 100 years later, you will be in your prime, but he will already be in his twilight years. How are you going to face him? Have you ever thought about these problems? Seeing that the emperor was enraged, Ji Yaoshua shut his mouth and stopped arguing with him. Taking a deep breath of air, the emperor composed himself and suddenly said, "A few days ago, I customized a supreme-grade flying sword for you. It's completely customized according to the weight and shape you're used to. Go and get it yourself." A supreme-grade flying sword? And custom-made? Ji Yaoshua was slightly taken aback. However, in the blink of an eye, Ji Yaoshua reacted and asked probingly, "Is it Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop? You've heard of Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop as well?" The emperor raised his brow slightly and turned to ask. Yes, Ji Yaoshua nodded. In the past year, Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop's reputation has already spread to our sect. In the territory of the Great Zhou dynasty, there are probably not many people who haven't heard of Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop. Pausing for a moment, Ji Yaoshua continued, I heard that it's Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop's monthly auction today. Master has already prepared the materials and spirit stones for the auction. That's good, the Emperor smiled. Head over and take a look. At the same time, retrieve that supreme grade flying sword. You just have to report my name. Ji Yaoshua frowned. For some reason, she felt that there was a deeper meaning to her father's smile. The Emperor continued, I've seen this Mo Ling before. He's not a bad young man. Although he's only in his early 20s, he has a stable temperament and has already achieved his current accomplishments. You definitely won't be able to imagine that Mo Ling is only a foundation establishment cultivator. However, he's able to refine supreme grade. Hold on. As though she sensed something, Ji Yaoshua interrupted the Emperor and asked with a frown, Father, what do you mean by that? The Emperor smiled. Don't be nervous. I don't have any other intentions. I just want you to see what a true paragon is like. Mo Ling is much stronger than that Su Zimo. Father. Ji Yaoshua interrupted the Emperor once more with a displeased expression and shook her head. I don't want that flying sword anymore. I don't want to meet this Mo Ling either. Shuer, listen to me, the Emperor said gently. There's no harm for you to meet this person. Even if you don't fancy him and don't have an affinity with him, it doesn't matter. At the very least, you can befriend the #1 weapon refinement master of Great Zhou, right? Ji Yaoshua fell silent. When the Emperor saw that Ji Yaoshua was moved, he teased, furthermore, this flying sword is tailor-made for you. If you don't go and retrieve it, are you going to get Mr. Mo to deliver it to you personally? There's still 2 more hours before the auction officially begins. There will definitely be many perfected Jindan gathered outside Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop. Let Bai Yuhan accompany you to take a look. Ji Yaoshua pondered for a moment before nodding. Just as Ji Yaoshua was about to turn and leave, she was stopped by the Emperor. The Emperor asked in a seemingly casual manner, right, there's a foundation establishment cultivator called Su Xiaoning in Azure Frost sect. She's an elixir refinement master and I heard that you guys have a pretty good relationship. What's her background? Ji Yaoshua's expression changed when she heard the word Su Xiaoning. Ji Yaoshua glared at her father with an agitated expression and shouted, Father, I've already cut ties with him a long time ago. Why are you still keeping an eye on the Su family? Father, I've told you not to touch anyone from the Su family. This matter has nothing to do with them at all. Ji Yaoshua's expression was frosty, as she left the Rain Admiration Pavilion without even turning back. Looking at Ji Yaoshua's back view, the Emperor was expressionless. However, his heart stirred and his eyes shone brightly. Ji Yaoshua's sudden agitation coupled with the 2 sentences she said just now aroused the Emperor's suspicions. Su Xiaoning? Someone from the Su family? How could a disciple of Azure Frost sect be related to someone from the Su family? Could there really be such a coincidence in this world? The Emperor of Great Zhou's expression kept changing and was uncertain. He had a feeling that there was a secret right before his eyes, and he was just short of poking through that window paper. All of a sudden, the Emperor's heart skipped a beat as he recalled something. A few years ago, the deputy commander of the Imperial Army who accompanied Ji Yaoshua to Pingyang town of Yan country had returned and reported that the Su family had 2 sons and a daughter. If the Su Xiaoning was this woman, then the brother she acknowledged in the capital. Chapter 291. Mo Ling, Su Zimo frowning, the Emperor fell into deep thought. How was that possible? Even though the truth was out, the Emperor was still unwilling to believe it. How could 2 completely different images in his heart turn into the same person in the end? After pondering for a moment, the Emperor called out in a deep voice, Men! Before long, 2 guards appeared and knelt on one knee with respectful expressions, awaiting the Emperor's orders. Go and get the deputy commander of the Imperial Army, Dai Su. The Emperor did not know much about the situation of the Su family, and intended to ask Dai Su again. When they heard the Emperor's words, the 2 guards froze and exchanged glances with troubled expressions. However, they did not leave immediately. What's wrong? The Emperor glared. The 2 guards shuddered and one of them said hurriedly, Your Majesty, Deputy Commander Dai died more than 10 days ago, and his corpse was found in a forest dozens of kilometers away from the capital. Dead? The Emperor's eyes narrowed with a cold glint. The other guard said, Deputy Commander Dai's throat was shattered. By the looks of it, it was crushed by the claws of a demon beast. Initial judgment is that he was attacked by a spirit beast. The Emperor asked expressionlessly, "Is his storage bag still around?" "It's gone." The Emperor sneered. The fact that his storage bag is gone means that he must have been killed by someone. Although spirit demons possessed intelligence, they could not open the storage bags of cultivators, and it was meaningless for them to take away the storage bags. The death of an Imperial Army deputy commander was not a big deal in the palace, and typically, the Emperor would not hear of it. Even if he did, he could not be bothered about the death of a Foundation establishment cultivator. But now that he received this news, the Emperor vaguely felt that something was amiss. It was too much of a coincidence. After pondering for a moment, the Emperor said in a deep voice, "Go and summon the Imperial Army that accompanied the third princess to Pingyang town of Yen country a few years ago. Also, summon the Imperial Army that was patrolling the palace with Dai Su before he died." Understood. The two guards retreated. People came and went on the long street. Two of the cultivators walked among the crowd, attracting the attention of many cultivators. Their gazes contained traces of respect and fear. Do you see that? Their robes, the emblem on their sleeves, and the sect medallions on their waists indicate that they are cultivators from one of the 5 great sects, the Southern Mountains sect. The one in front should be perfected Yun Shan of the Southern Mountains sect. The young man behind him should be the number 1 Foundation establishment cultivator of the Southern Mountains sect. His name is Shi Jian. I've heard that Shi Jian is very powerful, and has already unlocked 5 spirit meridians. It's enough for him to fight for a spot on the spirit ranking. Not long after, the two of them were submerged in the crowd. Soon, another female cultivator walked out of the crowd, causing the crowd to whisper. "Look, that looks like Adept Yining of the Azure Frost sect." Yes, it really is her. Although she's a little older, she still looks as beautiful as ever. Looks like the Azure Frost sect will be led by Taoist Master Yining. Not long after, Taoist Yining gradually disappeared into the distance under everyone's gaze. Not long after, another 3 cultivators walked over. The leader was a person in green robes who was at the Jindan realm. With one hand behind his back, his eyes were long and narrow. His gaze was sharp and cold as he walked over slowly. Behind that person, a man and woman walked side by side. Both of them were Foundation establishment cultivators. The man was extraordinarily handsome and his eyes were like stars. With a smile on his face, he was chatting softly with the woman beside him. The woman wore a light green dress and was only in her 20s. Her skin was whiter than snow and she exuded a gentle aura. Look, the 3 of them are from Iridescent Cloud's palace. If I'm not wrong, the green-robed cultivator in the lead should be perfected being Songlang of Iridescent Cloud's palace. It's said that he's extremely strong, and has even cultivated an extremely powerful Jindan phenomenon. He's one of the top experts of the Jindan realm. The handsome man behind him is Si Yutong. He should be here to fight for a spot on the spirit ranking. It's said that he has already unlocked 5 spirit meridians, and can be considered as a paragon of Iridescent Cloud's palace's Foundation establishment realm. That woman seems to be called Meng Qi or something. She looks pretty good. If she can be brought along by perfected being Song Lang and stand side by side with Si Yutong, her strength shouldn't be too bad either. Amidst everyone's discussions, the 3 of them gradually walked away. Look at the cultivators from the Southern Mountains sect, Azure Frost sect, and Iridescent Cloud's palace. They seem to be heading in the same direction. Could something big have happened over there? At this moment someone reacted and asked, "You don't even know about that?" Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop is holding an auction at the beginning of the month today. The cultivators of the 3 major sects must be there to customize supreme-grade spirit weapons. When he heard the discussions at the side, the handsome man from Iridescent Cloud's palace, Si Yutong, smiled. "Junior sister, look. Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop's auction at the beginning of every month is a rare event in the capital." Yes. Chun Mengqi nodded with a look of shock in her eyes. Along the way, almost all the cultivators were discussing Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop's auction today. Furthermore, they were not the only ones. It was said that even Southern Mountains sect and Azure Frost sect were participating in this auction. The fact that a weapon refinement master could wield such power in the capital, almost to the point of being able to summon the wind and rain, had already convinced Chen Mengqi completely. Even someone as strong as her master, perfected being Song Lang, did not have such influence. Chen Mengqi yearned and said, I wonder what this Mr. Mo looks like. It would be great if I had the chance to befriend him. That's difficult. Si Yutong shook his head. It's said that very few people have been able to meet Mr. Mo in the 3 years since Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop opened. Not to mention befriending him, even having the opportunity to meet Mr. Mo is worth bragging about for a while. Chen Mengqi pursed her lips and smiled, feeling a little disappointed. Si Yutong consoled her, however, don't worry, junior sister. Master is here for the supreme grade spirit weapon this time round. If Master succeeds, we might be able to bask in his glory and have a chance to meet Mr. Mo in person. Chen Mengqi nodded. I'll definitely succeed. Right then, perfected being Song Lang said indifferently with a firm tone without turning back. He had prepared for more than 3 years for the sake of this supreme grade spirit weapon auction, and was confident that he would be able to obtain the opportunity to customize a supreme grade spirit weapon. Before long, the 3 of them arrived in the vicinity of Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop. The 3 of them looked over and could not help but be dumbfounded, unable to conceal the shock in their eyes. Even perfected being Song Lang's expression changed slightly. There were way too many people at the entrance of Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop. At a glance, there were more than 10,000 cultivators gathered here. It was a dense crowd that was extremely majestic. Sweeping through the crowd, there were more than 1,000 perfected Jindan cultivators among them. It was rare to see so many perfected Jindan cultivators. But now, all of them were gathered at the entrance of this seemingly ordinary residence, waiting and looking into the residence continuously. Chapter 292. So many people? Ji Yaoshua looked at the dense crowd in front of her in surprise. Even though she had long heard of Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop's reputation, she had not expected that the auction at the beginning of the month would attract so many cultivators. Yaoshua, you might not know this, but it's said that this auction might be the last one. The person who spoke was dressed in spotless white robes. It was the commander of the White Hawk Guards, Bai Yuhan. The 2 of them had an extremely good relationship and addressed each other casually in private. Last one. Ji Yaoshua was confused. Bai Yuhan explained, yes, I heard that Mr. Mo will be leaving the capital after the sect competition. Those perfected beings Jindan are probably worried that they won't have another chance like this after Mr. Mo leaves. Pausing for a moment, Bai Yuhan swept her gaze across the crowd not far away. Look over there. Perfected beings Jindan of Iridescent Clouds Palace, Southern Mountain Sect and Azure Frost Sect are all here. I reckon that the auction this time round will be especially intense. Ji Yaoshua nodded. She was a little distracted and there was a hint of worry between her brows. Bai Yuhan noticed Ji Yaoshua's odd behavior and whispered, why? Is there something on your mind? Ji Yaoshua lowered her head in silence. Did you quarrel with the king because of that Su Zimo? Bai Yuhan asked again. Yes. Ji Yaoshua replied without hiding anything. A few years ago, Ji Yaoshua had told Bai Yuhan about this matter. Bai Yuhan said, the reason why the king asked you to retrieve this supreme grade flying sword is probably because he wants you to get to know Mr. Mo, right? Ji Yaoshua nodded and hesitated for a moment before asking, Sister Bai, what do you think? Me? Bai Yuhan smiled. Even though I've never met that Su Zimo, I've met Mr. Mo. I'm sure that Su Zimo can't compare to Mr. Mo. In the Rain Admiration Pavilion, the green-robed cultivator was neither servile nor overbearing. In the face of the pressure from True Fire Sect and the Scarlet Vulture Guards, he was still calm and composed. The scene of him reversing the situation with a few words left a deep impression on Bai Yuhan. Ji Yaoshua frowned. Bai Yuhan said, Yaoshua, you might not believe me when I say this, but you'll definitely be able to tell that Mr. Mo is different from the rest when you meet him. Ji Yaoshua said faintly, we'll see. Perfected being Song Lang placed his hands behind his back and puffed out his chest. His gaze was cold as he led his 2 disciples, Si Yutong and Chen Mengqi, towards the crowd, exuding a sharp aura. Many people sensed something and subconsciously looked over. Iridescent Clouds Palace was one of the 5 major sections. Furthermore, Perfected being Song Lang was a well-known ruthless character. Although it was crowded, many cultivators still had some misgivings and opened up a path. Before long, perfected being Song Lang and the other two had already reached the front of the crowd. In the first row, apart from perfected being Song Lang and the other two, there was also perfected being Yun Shan of Southern Mountain Sect, and his legacy disciple Shi Jian. The last one was perfected being Yi Ning of Azure Frost Sect. I'm determined to get the supreme grade spirit weapon this time round. Fellow Taoists, please don't fight. Perfected being Song Lang glanced sideways. Although his tone was calm, there was an unquestionable tone. Fufu. Perfected being Yun Shan laughed. Song Lang, your words are meaningless. You're determined to get it and so am I. Thereafter, perfected being Yun Shan turned around and asked, what do you say, fellow Taoist Yi Ning? Nothing much. Since it's an auction, everyone should compete fairly. There's nothing much to say. Perfected being Yi Ning had prepared for a long time for the bid for the supreme grade spirit weapon this time round as well. There was naturally no way she would leave just because of a single sentence from perfected being Song Lang. Perfected being Song Lang sneered and did not say anything else. Creak. Right then, a crack appeared on the door of Mo's spirit weapon workshop. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Countless gazes landed on the door of Mo's spirit weapon workshop with excitement and anticipation in their eyes. A woman darted out of the door. Her hair was yellow and curly and messy. However, she was so beautiful that one would instinctively overlook that flaw. Fellow Taoist Nianqi, you're finally out. Fellow Taoist Nianqi, you've become prettier again, a perfected being of Jin Dan said shamelessly. Fellow Taoist Nianqi, it's me. Cough cough, I'm here again. Any cultivator who had stayed in the capital for a year or so would know that Mr. Mo would not appear for each auction and Nianqi would always be the one hosting it. Although Nianqi was dressed as a maidservant and was at Foundation establishment, none of the perfected being of Jin Dan present dared to underestimate her. Nianqi did not say anything first and pressed down with both hands. Instantly, the initially noisy scene quietened down. There were more than 10,000 cultivators present, and more than 1,000 of them were perfected being of Jin Dan. However, a simple gesture from the maidservant caused everyone to quieten down. When she saw that, Shun Mengqi's eyes revealed a look of envy. If a maidservant possessed such capabilities, how extraordinary must her master be? Since there are many unfamiliar fellow Taoists here today, I'll simply repeat the rules of the auction. Bidders can collect a number from me later, and prepare 30 sets of materials. The starting price is 500,000 superior grade spirit stones, and each increment must not be less than 10,000. The highest bidder wins. With that said, Nianqi took out a bunch of jade badges with numbers from her storage bag and scattered them in midair. Perfected being Song Lang waved his sleeves and snatched the number 1 badge. Perfected being Yun Shan obtained the number 2 badge and perfected being Yi Ning obtained the number 3 badge. The other badges with numbers were taken away by the many perfected being of Jin Dan behind the 3 of them as well. Although there were more than 10,000 people present, most of them were disciples brought here by perfected being Jin Dan. The true bidders were the thousands of perfected being of Jin Dan present. Let the auction officially begin. The moment Nianqi's voice was finished, someone in the crowd had already raised their paddles to bid. In an alley not far away from the crowd, an exquisite carriage was parked. 2 women sat in the carriage. One of them was voluptuous and curvaceous, exuding a mature and seductive aura. The other woman wore a long pink dress and had a veil covering her face. However, when she blinked her eyes, it was as though there were ripples in them that could move one's soul. Auntie Gu, what's the background of this Mo Ling? He's snatching away the business of Sky Treasure Auction House with a single auction. The girl in pink frowned slightly with a hint of anger and curiosity in her tone. I'm not sure, the mature woman addressed as Auntie Gu shook her head. I heard from father that he's a young man in his early 20s. Father has high praises for him and thinks highly of him. The girl in pink said in a low voice. Why? Even the Missy of our Lust sect is interested in him? Auntie Gu looked at the girl in pink with a fake smile and asked teasingly. Tisk, the girl in pink pouted her lips in disdain. Raising her chin, she said confidently, if I were to appear, all I have to do is beckon with my finger and that Mo Ling would grovel at my feet obediently. Chapter 293. Auntie Goose smiled without saying anything. Suddenly, a strange energy fluctuation spread out from her glabella, sweeping through the courtyard of Mo's spirit weapon workshop slowly. That was a spirit consciousness that only Jining Jinjuan could cultivate. It was even stronger than the 5 senses of a cultivator, and was unobstructed by any obstacles. Like air currents, it could spread to every corner. A moment later, Auntie Goo's expression turned extremely strange as she muttered to herself in disbelief. "It's him? Who?" The girl in pink leaned over and asked curiously, blinking her watery eyes. Auntie Goo smiled. "Yeah, this person. I'm afraid it's really useless for you to hook your finger." "I don't believe it." The girl in pink pouted her lips. "If I meet an old monster, I might not be able to charm him because I'm not strong enough. A young man in his 20s, full of vigor. How could he possibly escape from my grasp? Right now, I'm just worried that you'll be foolishly abducted by him with a hook of his finger." Auntie Goo shook her head and chuckled. Even a simple frown and smile was filled with charm. "Auntie Goo, I won't believe you even more if you put it that way." The girl in pink pouted coquettishly and leaped into Auntie Goo's embrace, roaming her voluptuous body with both hands. If any man were to witness this scene, they would most likely be ignited with lust. Auntie Goo chuckled and waved her lotus-like arms a few times, pushing the girl in pink back. "Don't doubt me. You ran away with him the previous time and didn't even reply to let me know that you were safe. You made me worry for nothing." That was a few years ago. Besides that, Su Zimo is quite fun. It's quite fun to tease him for no reason." The girl in pink giggled. "Is that so?" Auntie Goo smiled. "In that case, this Mo Ling is quite fun as well." The girl in pink froze for a moment, unable to react. However, she could tell that there was a hidden meaning in Auntie Goo's words, and could not help but tilt her head in deep thought. A moment later, she covered her mouth and nearly exclaimed. Widening her eyes, she asked, "Su Zimo and Mo Ling can't be the same person, right?" "That's him." Auntie Goo retracted her smile and looked in the direction of Mo's spirit weapon workshop through the curtains, saying softly, "To think that I've still underestimated him." One of the 2 women was the general manager of the Sky Treasure auction house, Gu Shi. The other was the saintess of the Lust sect, Demoness Ji. She was also the daughter of the Emperor of Great Zhou, the little princess of the Great Zhou dynasty. "Is it really him?" Demoness Ji clapped and chuckled. "Auntie Goo, didn't I say that he's interesting? I really want to know how he did it. Did he rely on the ancient book of tempering? You want to go in and meet him?" Gu Shi could not help but ask when she saw how eager Demoness Ji was. "Yes." Just as Demoness Ji was about to bow and leave the carriage, she swept her gaze and sat back down. "What's wrong?" Gu Shi asked. She shook her head. "My sister is over there. I'd better not go." Gu Shi chuckled and turned around, looking in the direction of Mo's spirit weapon workshop in deep thought. Number 975 bids 1 million. Number 68 bids 1.01 million. Number 32 bids 1.02 million. In just a short while, the price of the supreme grade spirit weapon had already exceeded 1 million superior grade spirit stones against the bidding of the many perfected Jin Dan beings. Most of the perfected Jin Dan beings present had not even made a bid when the price had already exceeded their limits. They could not help but feel dejected and could only watch from where they were. After the price exceeded 1 million superior grade spirit stones, the speed gradually slowed down. Each time a bid was made, the perfected Jin Dan beings would become extremely cautious and increase the price by 10,000. Under normal circumstances, the price of a supreme grade spirit weapon would only be slightly more than 1 million superior grade spirit stones. However, supreme grade spirit weapons were treasures that had a price but no supply and were rarely seen on the market. Most cultivators who could obtain supreme grade spirit weapons would use them for themselves and would not bear to sell them. Furthermore, this was a rare opportunity to customize a supreme grade spirit weapon. It was even more precious. In the first row, the 3 perfected Jin Dan beings from the 3 major sects, Iridescent Clouds Palace, Southern Mountains Sect and Azure Frost Sect, did not participate in the bidding. Seeing that the price had already risen to 1 million, perfected being Song Lang suddenly said, "Let's not waste any more time. Number 1 bids 1.5 million. The moment he said that, the crowd was in an uproar. With that, the price rose by a total of 400,000 superior-grade spirit stones. That was enough to make more than half of the cultivators who wanted to continue bidding give up. 5 million superior-grade spirit stones was not something that every perfected Jin Dan being could produce. Spirit stones were consumables after all. For cultivators, the most important thing was to raise their cultivation realms. If they wanted to raise their cultivation realms, they had to expend spirit stones to cultivate. Even perfected being Yun Shan and perfected being Yi Ning's expressions changed slightly when they heard perfected being Song Lang's bid. Let alone itinerant cultivators and perfected Jin Dan beings of small sections. After perfected being Song Lang's bid, a few breaths passed and no one continued to bid. Number 3 bids 51 million spirit stones. Right then, perfected being Yi Ning spoke and increased the price by 10,000. Perfected being Song Lang sneered and turned to perfected being Yun Shan, asking, "Fellow Taoist Yun Shan, aren't you going to bid? If you don't, you won't have another chance later on." Perfected being Yun Shan grit his teeth and said in a deep voice, "Number 2 bids 52 million. The moment he said that, perfected being Song Lang spoke again with a calm expression. Number 1 bids 8 million. The moment he spoke, the price rose by almost 300,000. Perfected being Yun Shan's expression darkened as he glared fiercely at perfected being Song Lang. Perfected being Yi Ning took a deep breath and said slowly, "Number 3 bids 81 million. 2 million superior grade spirit stones was her upper limit. The moment it exceeded 2 million superior grade spirit stones, she would have to back down no matter what." Perfected Jin Dan beings at the back had already gone silent and were watching everything quietly. Given the price of a supreme grade spirit weapon, it was basically a fight between perfected being Song Lang and perfected being Yi Ning. Even perfected being Yun Shan was no longer bidding. As though he could sense the pressure from perfected being Yi Ning, perfected being Song Lang raised his brow slightly. Number 1 bids 85 million. When she saw perfected being Song Lang's provocative gaze, perfected being Yi Ning made up her mind and shouted, "Number 3 bids 2 million. This was her limit. If perfected being Song Lang increased the price, she would back down. This time round, perfected being Song Lang finally laughed and said leisurely, "Fellow Taoist Yi Ning, this is your limit, right? Number 1 bids 2.01 million. Perfected being Yi Ning's eyes darkened as she shook her head. The reason why she raised the price to 2 million in one go was to create immense pressure on perfected being Song Lang, and even force him to back out of the bidding. Unfortunately, she did not succeed. 5 breaths passed and no one else raised the price. Perfected being Song Lang surveyed his surroundings with a sharp gaze that even revealed a hint of threat. The meaning in his gaze was clear: anyone who dared to cause trouble at this moment would be making an enemy out of him. Perfected being Song Lang. Chapter 294. When perfected being Song Lang announced the high price of 2.01 million superior grade spirit stones, there was no longer much suspense in the auction. Even perfected being Yun Shan and perfected being Yi Ning of the 5 major sects could only lower their heads helplessly, let alone the cultivators of the smaller sects or itinerant cultivators. As long as 10 breaths passed and no one raised the price, the opportunity to customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon would fall on perfected being Song Lang's head. "It's basically decided." Outside the crowd, Bai Yuhan said softly. Ji Yaoshua nodded as well. Yes, judging from perfected being Song Lang's tone and demeanor, he should have prepared more than 2 million superior-grade spirit stones. Bai Yuhan smiled and said, "Just this momentum of being determined to win is enough to overwhelm everyone. At this moment, even if someone were to raise the price, it would be difficult for them to win against him, and they might even incur his wrath. It's not worth it." That's right. 10 breaths passed as the two of them conversed. Indeed, there were more than 1,000 Jin Dan perfected beings present, but no one had the strength to raise the price. The dust had settled. Perfected being Song Lang heaved a sigh of relief. Even if he came prepared, 2 million superior grade spirit stones was not a small sum for him. At this moment, if someone were to raise the price, he could only grit his teeth and continue bidding. Thankfully, that did not happen. A look of joy flashed through perfected being Song Lang's narrow eyes as he smiled. unable to conceal his excitement. In an alley not far away, Wuxia lowered the curtains of the carriage and said softly, "Let's go back. There's nothing left to see." "Yes, let's go," Demoness G nodded as well. The coachman steered the carriage and began to turn around. The crowd in front of Mo's spirit weapon workshop began to disperse as well. Many perfected beings of Jin Dan were in low spirits and looked at the entrance of Mo's spirit weapon workshop reluctantly. Perfected being Songlang turned to look at perfected being Yunshan and perfected being Yining at the side and smiled gently. "Thank you for letting me win. Fellow Taoist Songlang is rich and imposing. Indeed, we can't compare to him. Congratulations." Perfected being Yunshan sneered and turned to leave with Shijian. Perfected being Yining harumphed softly. Although she did not say anything, she was indignant. When he saw their expressions, perfected being Songlang chuckled in delight. Turning around, he raised his chin at Nianqi and said, "Hey young lady, announce the results." Si Yutong said in a low voice, "Junior sister, Master has won the bid. We might have a chance to meet Mr. Mo later." "Yes." Chan Mengqi clenched her fists tightly. Her eyes revealed a trace of anticipation as she nodded. Ever since the start of the auction, Nianqi had not said a single word. He had been standing in front of the door with a calm expression, looking at the many Jin Dan perfected persons bidding below. It was only at this moment that Nianqi declared, "I hereby announce that the fellow Taoist who has obtained the right to customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon in this auction is number 3. The crowd had already begun to disperse. However, not long after Nianqi's voice fell, everyone's footsteps gradually stopped. Their faces were filled with doubt, and their expressions were strange. Number 3? Wasn't number 3 Adept Yining from the Azure Frost sect? Was it a slip of the tongue or had he misheard? Everyone turned back instinctively. In the alley, just as the carriage was about to leave, a soft exclamation sounded from within the carriage. "Why is it number 3? A gentle voice sounded with a hint of confusion. Outside the crowd, Ji Yaoshua and Bai Yuhan exchanged glances, somewhat stunned. Bai Yuhan was confused as well. Blinking her eyes, she said, "Normally speaking, the highest bidder wins. Why did it end up in number 3's hands?" At the door, perfected being Songlang's smile froze when he heard Nianqi's voice. Perfected being Yunshan paused in his tracks and turned around in deep thought. Perfected being Yining froze on the spot, unable to react to the surprise that fell from the skies. "Young lady, you must have said something wrong, right?" Perfected being Songlang frowned slightly, looking displeased. "That's right," Nianqi replied naturally. Perfected being Songlang's expression darkened as he flipped his hand to reveal his number badge, saying in a deep voice, "Look carefully. I'm number 1. Earlier on, number 1 bid 2.01 million superior grade spirit stones. Number 1 bid the highest." Oh, Nianqi nodded. "You're right." When he heard that, perfected being Songlang's expression softened slightly. Unexpectedly, Nianqi changed the topic and said seriously, "However, number 3 is the one who obtained the rights to customize supreme-grade spirit weapons." When the results were announced at the beginning, everyone doubted that they had heard it clearly. However, this time round all the cultivators present heard it clearly. Something was happening. The cultivators who had already left gathered in front of Mo's spirit weapon workshop at an even faster speed. Most of them had gloating expressions as they waited to watch the show. Initially, there was no one around perfected being Songlang. In the blink of an eye, another group of people surrounded him. A mocking look flashed through perfected being Yunshan's eyes as he pretended to ask with concern, "Fellow Taoist Songlang, what's going on?" "Humph." Perfected being Songlang harumphed coldly with a terrible expression. He glared at Nianqi with a dark gaze and asked slowly, "Young lady, you're not joking with me, right?" A shuddering aura emanated from perfected being Songlang's body as it slowly pressed towards Nianqi. Everyone could tell that perfected being Songlang was truly enraged at this moment. Against perfected being Songlang's might, Nianqi's expression did not change as he asked instead, "Do I look like I'm joking? Alright, I want an explanation." Perfected being Songlang strode forward and questioned loudly with an imposing aura that shone brightly. Perfected being Songlang's aura was aggressive. Nianqi frowned and asked impatiently, "What explanation do you want? I was clearly the highest bidder at 2. 1 million superior grade spirit stones for the rights to customize supreme grade spirit weapons. What right do you have to give it to someone else? Perfected being Song Lang said slowly, young lady, if you didn't hear it clearly, I can repeat it to you right now. I was the one who bid the highest in the final bid. All the cultivators present can attest to that. Oh, Nianqi replied indifferently and asked instead. And then? Perfected being Song Lang felt a dull pain in his chest as he shuddered, nearly spitting out a mouthful of blood. On one side he was furious and on the brink of breaking down, while on the other side, he was still calm and composed. Everyone held back their laughter when they saw perfected being Song Lang's pale expression. My master was the one who bid 2.01 million superior grade spirit stones. Didn't you hear it clearly? Perfected being Song Lang's disciple Si Yutong could not hold it in any longer and stepped forward hollering. Nianqi covered his ears and hollered, what are you hollering for? So what if you're rich? That retort nearly choked Si Yutong to death. Finally, someone could not hold it in and burst out laughing. Perfected being Song Lang took a deep breath of air and the muscles on his face twitched. His eyelids twitched as he grit his teeth. It's clearly the case that the highest bidder wins. I just want to ask, where are the rules of Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop? Where is the fairness? Rules? Fairness? Nianqi looked at perfected being Song Lang with a, you're so naive expression. In Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop, all the rules and fairness are decided by my young master. Chapter 295. By saying that my young master has the final say, he meant that even if you offered 10 million superior grade spirit stones, he would still not give it to you, let alone 2.01 million superior grade spirit stones. Perfected being Song Lang's face darkened and his lips twitched. At that moment, he felt as though he had punched cotton and could not exert any strength at all. It was extremely uncomfortable. Sensing the mocking gazes of the crowd, Si Yutong and Shun Mengqi felt their faces burn in shame. Si Yutong had witnessed Nianqi's ability to choke others and was still shrouded in the shadow of, so what if you're rich? How would he dare to provoke her again? Shun Mengqi was indignant and could not help but step forward to question, fellow Taoist, are you still being reasonable? We clearly agreed at the start that the highest bidder would get it. Don't try to reason with me. Nianqi waved it off hurriedly and blinked her watery eyes, explaining seriously, that's because Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop has never been reasonable. You, Shun Mengqi's body swayed and her face turned pale. Feeling suffocated, she was defeated. Ha 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 ha. A burst of laughter broke out from the crowd. For perfected being Yi Ning, this was truly a pleasant surprise. Perfected being Yi Ning stepped forward with a smile and cupped her fists. Thank you, fellow Taoist Nianqi. Nianqi nodded. Perfected being Song Lang tried his best to compose himself and suppress the anger in his chest, saying in a deep voice, young lady, since your young master has the final say, all right, I want to meet Mr. Mo. You think you can meet him just because you say so? Nianqi glanced sideways at perfected being Song Lang and sneered. Young lady, I don't understand why the rights to customize supreme grade spirit weapons for this auction landed in someone else's hands. However, I'll have to trouble you to inform him that perfected being Song Lang of Iridescent Cloud's Palace is here to meet him. Perfected being Song Lang raised his head slightly and a look of pride flashed through his eyes. Mr. Mo must have heard of my name before. Young lady, I can understand that you're insensible. However, I'm advising you as an experienced person that you'd better not make the decision for your young master in case you get punished. Nianqi frowned slightly and hesitated. Perfected being Song Lang continued, I believe that no one in the territory of the Great Zhou dynasty will reject my friendship. These words were spoken with arrogance and decisiveness. Given perfected being Song Lang's status and cultivation, he was indeed qualified to say those words. No matter what, Nianqi was not even 20 years old and was only a foundation establishment cultivator. For a moment, he was stunned by perfected being Song Lang's aura and could not make up his mind. Nianqi looked hesitant. Prior to this, Su Zimo had merely instructed her to ignore any cultivators from Iridescent Cloud's palace that bid. Nianqi didn't know the reason either. At that moment, Nianqi felt another layer of worry in his heart, when he saw how confident perfected being Song Lang was. She acted on her own accord and created a strong enemy for her young master. Wasn't it a little rash? Fellow Taoist Nianqi, since you've already decided, let's not. Perfected being Yining hesitated. She was a little anxious, afraid that Nianqi would go in and ask Mr. Mo and cause other changes. However, she was too embarrassed to say it too clearly. Perfected being Songlang spoke once more and said confidently, I dare to say that Mr. Mo will definitely change his mind if you go in and inform him. Also, if you don't have enough spirit stones, I can raise it to 5 million superior grade spirit stones. Pust. When they heard that, everyone could not help but gasp. He raised the price to 5 million in one go. Everyone could sense that perfected being Songlang was bent on obtaining that supreme grade spirit weapon. When perfected being Yining heard that, she sighed sadly and shook her head. If perfected being Songlang's bid was only 10,000 higher than hers, perfected being Songlang would still be confident. But now, perfected being Songlang had already bid 5 million. If perfected being Yining was in Mr. Mo's shoes, she would have chosen perfected being Songlang. Everything else aside, the price alone was a whopping 500,000 superior grade spirit stones higher. Mr. Mo had no reason to reject it. Pondering for a moment, Nianqi said, Hold on for a moment. I'll go in and ask my young master. Nianqi returned to the courtyard and closed the door tightly, speeding towards Su Zimo's cultivation room. Before long, Nianqi arrived outside Su Zimo's room and knocked gently on the door. Come in. Su Zimo's voice sounded. Nianqi pushed the door and entered, going straight to the point. Young master, something happened at the auction. What's wrong? Su Zimo sat on the ground and asked casually without getting up. Nianqi said, There was indeed a cultivator from Iridescent Cloud's palace outside for the auction this time round. I ignored him and gave the right to customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon to the next cultivator. Then, Nianqi sorted out his thoughts before continuing. Then, the cultivator from Iridescent Cloud's palace seemed rather powerful and said that he wanted to meet you, young master. He even said that you must have heard of his name and would definitely change your mind. Oh. Su Zimo raised his brows slightly. Right? Nianqi continued. The cultivator from Iridescent Cloud's palace has already bid 5 million superior grade spirit stones, a whopping 500,000 more than the second place. That powerful? Su Zimo smiled and walked over, stretching his muscles and bones as he asked casually, What's his name? Nianqi replied, Perfected being Songlang. Suddenly, Su Zimo paused in his actions. What's wrong, young master? Nianqi asked curiously. Su Zimo smiled with a hint of mockery in his eyes. He said with a slightly emotional tone, Nothing much, just an old friend. Should we meet him or not? Nianqi could not figure out what Su Zimo meant. Of course we'll have to meet him. However, now is not the time. Su Zimo said indifferently, Also, he's right about something. I have indeed changed my mind. From the looks of it, Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop seems to have some special rules? Outside the crowd, Ji Yaoshua asked with a puzzled expression. I don't know. Bai Yuhan shook her head. However, there must be a deeper meaning for Mr. Mo to set such a rule. Ji Yaoshua frowned in deep thought. Her gaze changed as she murmured softly, Or perhaps Mr. Mo has some feud with Iridescent Cloud's palace? I'm not sure if he has any feud with Iridescent Cloud's palace. However, Mr. Mo is definitely at odds with True Fire Sect, Bai Yuhan replied. In an alley not far away, in the carriage behind the carriage. Suddenly, Demonist Ji said, I recalled something. Su Zimo seems to have a feud with perfected being Songlang. Oh. Gushi was surprised. Demonist Ji recalled, back in the palace of Yen country, he killed a cultivator of Iridescent Cloud's palace on the spot. Furthermore, he got a disciple of Iridescent Cloud's palace to relay a message that he was going to take perfected being Songlang's life. In that case, it makes sense why there was such a strange outcome in the auction just now. Gushi thought for a moment and shook her head. However, Su Zimo is only a foundation establishment cultivator. He's still far from being able to take perfected being Songlang's life. One is a foundation establishment cultivator while the other is a Jin Dan. There's definitely a difference in strength between them. However, the two of them are comparable in terms of status, Demonist Ji said. Everything else aside, The weight of the words Mr. Mo alone was enough to go against perfected being Song Lang. Now that we understand that, the outcome of Nianqi entering and reporting, Demonis G grinned. Hehe, there's a good show to watch. Chapter 296. Si Yutong said softly, Master, don't be anxious. This maidservant is inexperienced and it's understandable that she hasn't heard of your name. Mr. Mo will definitely change his mind once she reports to him. Yes. Perfected being Song Lang nodded. He was confident that there was no reason for Mr. Mo to reject someone who offered 5 million superior grade spirit stones and choose someone else. Si Yutong turned to look at the sullen Shenming Qi and said gently, Junior sister, don't be angry. There's no need for us to stoop to the level of a maidservant. Right then, with a creak, the door of the courtyard opened with a crack. He's out. He's out. A commotion broke out in the crowd. Perfected being Song Lang was not the only one. Many cultivators nearby were waiting for the final outcome as well. Nianqi walked out with a calm expression. He looked at perfected being Song Lang and nodded. You're right, perfected being. My young master has indeed heard of your name. Furthermore, as you expected, he has changed his mind as well. The dark clouds on perfected being Song Lang's face dissipated, and he revealed a smile once more as he looked around smugly. Perfected being Yi Ning's eyes dimmed. Although she had expected this outcome, she was still somewhat disappointed. Si Yutong was unforgiving and sneered. Little maidservant, didn't your young master ask you to apologize to my master? Nianqi smiled without saying anything. Disperse, disperse. Some cultivators did not linger and turned to leave when they saw that there was an outcome. Nianqi continued. My young master even said that if it's you, perfected being Song Lang, he's willing to customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon for you for free. When he heard that, perfected being Song Lang was elated. From 5 million spirit stones to a free customization, he felt an immense sense of happiness and pride. Is perfected being Song Lang that amazing? That's about right. He's already at perfected Jin Dan at the age of 200. He's the one with the highest chance of advancing to Jining Xinjuan. Perfected being Song Lang sure is impressive to be able to customize for free. Perfected being Song Lang felt a little smug as he listened to the discussions in the crowd, and felt the envious gazes of the crowd. After all, he had lived for more than 200 years. Perfected being Song Lang suppressed the ecstasy in his heart and tried his best to restrain himself. He nodded to his surroundings and cupped his fists. Although he pretended to be indifferent, as if he had already expected all of this, it was difficult to conceal the complacency between his brows. Haha. Perfected being Song Lang could still hold back his excitement and pretend to be calm. However, his disciple Si Yutong could no longer hold it in. His face was flushed and he could not stop laughing. Nianqi smiled. However, young master said that it's fine to help perfected being Song Lang customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon for free, but he has another request. Speak. Perfected being Song Lang was in a great mood as he waved his hand and declared proudly, as long as it's something that I can do, I'll definitely do my best to cooperate. Don't worry, Taoist master. This request is very easy for you. Nianqi suddenly stopped smiling. His tone turned cold as he said word by word. Young master said, he wants you to kneel. The clamor in the crowd suddenly quieted down. The entire place was so silent that one could hear a pin drop. Every single cultivator present was stunned and dumbfounded as they looked at Nianqi, and perfected being Song Lang instinctively. He wants you to kneel. Although the place was noisy, everyone heard those words clearly and there was no mistake about it. Ji Yaoshua and Bai Yuhan were both stunned. Not far away, in a carriage in an alley, a woman's gentle voice sounded with a hint of laughter. Ha, I knew it. Su Zimo is very interesting. Si Yutong's laughter stopped abruptly. Perfected being Song Lang's expression froze on his face as he turned around slowly. Narrowing his eyes, he asked coldly, young lady, what did you say earlier on? If you have the guts, say it again for me to hear. Didn't you hear me clearly? Nianqi was oblivious to perfected being Song Lang's threat and said indifferently, as long as you kneel, young master will refine a supreme-grade spirit weapon for you. Oh right. Young Master even said that if you kneel down and kowtow once more, Young Master will refine another supreme-grade spirit weapon for you. Humiliation. Although many cultivators did not know why Mr. Mo would make such a change, for perfected being Song Lang, this was a complete humiliation. No matter how valuable a supreme-grade spirit weapon was, how could perfected being Song Lang kneel down in front of everyone? If he were to kneel, he would definitely lose all face in the cultivation world in the future. Fufufu. Suddenly, perfected being Song Lang laughed. How dare a mere maidservant like you insult perfected being Jean Dan as a foundation establishment cultivator? Even if this is the capital, I can still kill you right now. Perfected being Song Lang's long and narrow eyes shone with a chilling killing intent. His hands that were initially behind his back were now on his storage bag and his voice was chilling. Everyone could sense perfected being Song Lang's killing intent. To everyone, Nian Qi was merely a maidservant. Given perfected being Song Lang's status and identity, he might not be punished for killing a maidservant in a domineering manner. Nian Qi's expression was unchanged as she continued. Young Master has already expected that you'll definitely fly into a rage after hearing this request and want to kill me. However, this is the capital. If you dare to make the first move, the other cultivators will have sufficient reasons to stop you. He. Perfected being Song Lang laughed. Who would dare to stop me for a mere maidservant like you? Nian Qi nodded. That's why my young master said that he'll customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon for anyone who beheads you. Perfected being Song Lang's expression changed. That statement was way too ruthless. It was as though he was being roasted on fire. Not only did he want to humiliate her, he wanted her to endure it with nowhere to vent. At that moment, as long as perfected being Song Lang dared to attack Nian Qi, the other cultivators would have sufficient reasons to attack and join forces to kill him. That was because his head could be exchanged for a supreme-grade spirit weapon. Who wouldn't be tempted? Even if some cultivators were wary of his prestige and did not dare to attack, the commanders of the Scarlet Vulture and Azure Falcon Guards had already walked over not far away. As long as he dared to make any strange moves, the two of them would definitely attack without hesitation. Perfected being Song Lang's expression was extremely terrible and dark. No matter what, he had already lost all his dignity today. However, perfected being Song Lang could not understand why Mo Ling would have such a deep hatred for him. The reason why he was able to get to where he was today was because his hands were stained with endless blood. He could no longer remember when he had a feud with cultivators with the surname Mo. From the looks of it, Mr. Mo must know me, Blue Wave? Perfected being Song Lang was a top expert of the Jean Dan realm after all and adjusted quickly. A mocking look flashed through his eyes as he sneered. Since we're old acquaintances, why do you have to hide inside and not meet me? Nian Qi replied. Young Master said that we'll definitely meet, but not now. When is that? The sect competition. All right. Perfected being Song Lang nodded and said coldly, at that time, let's see who this Mo Ling is. Chapter 297. With that said, there was no way perfected being Song Lang could stay any longer. With a dark expression, he turned and left with his two disciples. Following perfected being Song Lang's departure, the surrounding cultivators dispersed as well. In the alley, the coachman drove the carriage into the distance. Outside the crowd, Ji Yaoshua and Bai Yuhan stood by the side. After watching the entire process of the auction, their expressions were somewhat emotional. Bai Yuhan said, "Did you see that?" Mr. Mo toyed with perfected being Song Lang in the palm of his hand without even appearing. The latter could only leave dejectedly. Ji Yaoshua nodded with a look of admiration in her eyes. That Mr. Mo is indeed quite impressive. He had already predicted perfected being Song Lang's subsequent reaction, and dealt with it accordingly. Pausing for a moment, Ji Yaoshua smiled. If father hadn't told me that he was only a man in his 20s, I would have thought that he was some scheming old man. Fufu. Bai Yuhan looked at Ji Yaoshua teasingly and chuckled. How is it? Are you curious about Mr. Mo now? Ji Yaoshua shook her head and smiled helplessly. Don't worry, when you meet Mr. Mo, you'll forget about that Su Zimo completely, Bai Yuhan swore. While the two of them were talking, perfected being Yi Ning had already placed 30 sets of materials for customizing supreme-grade spirit weapons, and 2 million superior-grade spirit stones into her storage bag and handed it to Nianqi. Ji Yaoshua and Bai Yuhan headed towards Mo's spirit weapon workshop. Perfected being Yining seemed to be saying something to Nianqi, but Nianqi shook his head. Slightly disappointed, perfected being Yining turned to leave. "Greetings, master." Ji Yaoshua happened to walk over and bowed slightly, saying gently. Although Ji Yaoshua was dressed normally and bowed to perfected being Yining, she exuded the aura of royalty and was indescribably noble. "Oh, it's Yaoshua. There's no need to bow." Taoist Master Yining nodded and extended her hands to help Ji Yaoshua up. The disciples of the Azure Frost sect did not know about Ji Yaoshua's identity, but she did. Ji Yaoshua was only going to the Azure Frost sect to cultivate for 10 years. When it was time for the sect tournament, she would return to the Great Zhou Imperial City and not return to the Azure Frost sect. At this time, Ji Yaoshua had returned to the royal city. In fact, she had already regained her status as a princess. "Congratulations, master," Ji Yaoshua said with a smile. Perfected being Yining could not hide the joy in her eyes as she smiled. It was also a coincidence. Who would have thought that Mr. Mo would choose me in the end? Bai Yuhan asked, "Fellow Taoist Yining, what did you say to Nianqi just now?" "I mentioned that I wanted to meet Mr. Mo and thank him in person. Unfortunately, he did not agree and rejected me directly." Perfected being Yining laughed bitterly. Ji Yaoshua consoled. From what fellow Taoist Nianqi said, "Mr. Mo will definitely show up for the sect tournament. You'll definitely be able to meet him then." "Yes, I hope so." The three of them chatted for a while more before perfected being Yining just now left. Ji Yaoshua turned around and smiled. "See, he's the #1 weapon refinement master of the Great Zhou Imperial City. He's not someone you can meet just because you want to. Even my master was rejected. Let's give it a try. What if it works?" Bai Yuhan teased. "At most, we'll just announce your title as the third princess. Who knows, we might be able to control the situation." "Sister Bai, you're teasing me again." Ji Yaoshua shook her head and chuckled. The two of them went forward and Bai Yuhan knocked on the door. Before long, the door opened and Nianqi popped her head out. Blinking her watery eyes, she looked at Ji Yaoshua and Bai Yuhan curiously. "The auction is over. Fellow Taoists, you're late." Ji Yaoshua smiled gently. "Fellow Taoist, we're not here to participate in the auction. Previously, the Empress of Great Zhou ordered a supreme-grade spirit weapon from Mr. Mo and I'm here to retrieve it." "Oh." Nianqi came to a realization and her gaze swept across Bai Yuhan. She recognized that this was the commander of the White Hawk Guards. Since the yellow-robed woman was traveling with Bai Yuhan, there should be no mistake about it. "Please wait a moment, the two of you. That supreme-grade spirit weapon is with the young master. I'll retrieve it right away," Nianqi said and was about to close the door. Hey! When Bai Yuhan saw that Ji Yaoshua was indifferent and did not mention anything about meeting Mo Ling, she called out to Nianqi hurriedly and coughed gently. "Fellow Taoist Nianqi, can we enter together and visit Mr. Mo? After all, we've admired him for a long time." "No, you can't." Nianqi shook her head without hesitation. Pausing for a moment, Nianqi looked at Bai Yuhan and asked in confusion, "Commander Bai, haven't you met my young master before?" "I've met him, but she hasn't." Bai Yuhan pointed to Ji Yaoshua who was beside her. "That won't do either." Nianqi still shook her head and closed the door. "Right, she's the third princess of the Great Zhou dynasty." "Hey!" Bai Yuhan shouted hurriedly, not knowing if Nianqi heard her. Ji Yaoshua could not help but chuckle. "Sister Bai, stop shouting. He's ignoring you. Even if you don't find it embarrassing, I'm scared." Bai Yuhan pouted. "So be it. What's the big deal?" After a while, the door opened once more and Nianqi appeared in a flash, looking at Ji Yaoshua with a curious gaze. "Where's the supreme-grade spirit weapon? Let's take it and leave." Bai Yuhan was indignant after being rejected twice by Nianqi. Nianqi said, "The spirit weapon is in the hands of my young master." Bai Yuhan frowned and asked, "Where did you go earlier on?" Nianqi bowed slightly and made an inviting gesture with a smile. "My young master invites the two of you." Ji Yaoshua and Bai Yuhan were stunned. Initially, both of them thought that it was impossible for them to meet Mr. Mo, but now there was such a reversal. Mr. Mo's thoughts were really unfathomable. Ji Yaoshua was rather calm and had a calm expression. To her, it did not matter whether she met him or not. However, Bai Yuhan smiled and grabbed Ji Yaoshua's wrist happily, urging, "Let's go. This is a rare opportunity." Under Nianqi's lead, the two of them entered the most mysterious residence in the capital of Great Zhou. The houses in the courtyard were arranged in a picturesque manner. The courtyard was clean and simple with a neat lawn. Not far away, there was a stone table and a few stone stools. There was nothing else. A gigantic black dog covered in scales sprawled by the Jishui River, as though it was taking a nap with its eyes closed. "Please take a seat." Nianqi brought the two of them to the stone table and saw that there was already a pot of tea on the table, emitting steam and a fragrant aroma. Ji Yaoshua and Bai Yuhan sat down as instructed and Nianqi poured a cup of tea for each of them. When she saw Nianqi in such a state, Bai Yuhan felt a little uneasy. Although Nianqi was a maidservant on the surface, there were not many cultivators in the capital of Great Zhou who could get her to serve them tea. "Sister Yaoshua, it's really you." Right then, an exclamation sounded from not far away. Ji Yaoshua turned around and saw Su Xiaoning sprinting over with a delighted expression. "Xiaoning, why are you here?" Ji Yaoshua was stunned. At this moment, another voice sounded. It was as gentle as jade. "Miss Ji, how have you been?" Chapter 298. Ji Yaoshua's petite body shuddered as she turned to look. Not far away, a scholarly-looking cultivator strode over. His green robes fluttered in the wind, his eyes were clear and there was a faint smile on his lips. Ji Yaoshua was stunned. For a moment, she was in a daze and remained silent for a long time. For some reason, Ji Yaoshua felt a lump in her throat and her eyes reddened. That figure had appeared in her mind countless times. Now that she was seeing him, she felt that it was surreal. It was as though there were no other sounds in her ears except for that single sentence. "Miss Ji, how have you been?" "Great. So you've known Mr. Mo for a long time. You've been hiding it from me." Bai Yuhan leaned over to Ji Yaoshua and whispered. When she heard that, Ji Yaoshua gradually snapped out of her daze. The green-robed man had already arrived. "Greetings, Mr. Mo." Bai Yuhan stood up hurriedly and cupped her fists. The green-robed man merely nodded and shifted his gaze back to Ji Yaoshua's beautiful face with a hint of a smile in his eyes. Bai Yuhan looked at Ji Yaoshua and then at the green-robed man. She could not understand what was going on. If the two of them knew each other, why were they not saying anything? If they did not know each other, what did Mr. Mo mean by that just now? "You're Mr. Mo?" After a while, Ji Yaoshua finally spoke. "I think so." The green-robed man nodded. "Then should I call you young Master Su, Mr. Mo, or Zimo?" "Up to you." The moment he said that, the two of them exchanged glances and smiled as though they had a telepathic connection, just like before. "Have a seat." Su Zimo pointed to a stone stool at the side and sat down with Ji Yaoshua. Bai Yuhan froze on the spot and had yet to snap back to her senses. "What young Master Su? What Zimo?" Turning around, Bai Yuhan hurried back to Ji Yaoshua's side and asked in confusion, "Yaoshua, what do you mean by young Master Su and Zimo?" This is Zemo Ling, Mr. Mo." Ji Yaoshua smiled but did not say anything. She turned to look at Su Zimo. Su Zimo glanced at Bai Yuhan and said frankly, "Let's get to know each other again. I am Su Zimo." "Which Su Zimo?" Bai Yuhan was a little confused as she asked subconsciously. "Yin Kingdom Su Zimo." "Ah!" Bai Yuhan exclaimed with a face filled with disbelief. "You're that cripple Su Zimo who can't cultivate and has no spirit root?" Upon hearing the word cripple, Ji Yaoshua frowned. She glanced sideways and said softly, "Sister Bai." Nianqi looked unhappy and couldn't help but say, "Commander Bai, how can you say that? If my young master is a cripple, then who in this world isn't a cripple? How is that possible?" For a moment, Bai Yuhan found it hard to accept. Her gaze darted back and forth between Su Zimo, Ji Yaoshua, Nianqi and Su Xiaoning. However, she realized that none of them seemed to be joking. In Bai Yuhan's impression, Su Zimo from Yin Kingdom and Mr. Mo before her were existences from two completely different worlds. One was in the skies, the #1 weapon refinement master of the Great Zhou dynasty. He was so famous that almost all the perfected Jean Dan wanted to befriend him. The other was underground from a small vassal state in a remote place. Without a spirit root, he could not cultivate and was the most ordinary mortal in the mortal world. How did the two of them end up as one? Su Zimo smiled and said indifferently, "That's right. There are many things in this world that are impossible." Changing the topic, Ji Yaoshua asked curiously, "Why are you called Mo Ling?" Su Zimo pointed to the plaque on the door. Mo Ling is only the name of the weapon workshop. Everyone instinctively thought that my name was Mo Ling. I couldn't be bothered to explain, and that's how it spread. To think that you've changed so much after a few years. You've already become the famous Mr. Mo in the capital. It's hard to even meet you, Ji Yaoshua teased. Su Zimo smiled as well. How would I dare to not meet the third princess of the Great Zhou dynasty when you've already announced yourself? Exclamation point. Ji Yaoshua covered her mouth and chuckled. Rolling her eyes at Bai Yuhan, she said, "It's all because Sister Bai called me that." In Bai Yuhan's eyes, ever since she met Su Zimo, Ji Yaoshua seemed to have changed into a different person. The worry in her eyes was gone and her beautiful eyes were like water. She smiled sweetly and was indescribably beautiful. Ji Yaoshua thought for a moment and said, "Right, Father has a high opinion of you as well. You're talking about Mo Ling, right?" Su Zimo's tone was calm. "It's the same anyway. You guys are the same person," Ji Yaoshua said. Su Zimo smiled and did not say anything. He knew very well that if the Emperor of Great Zhou discovered that he was Mo Ling, it would be hard to tell what his attitude towards him would be. The Emperor's heart was unpredictable. If the Emperor of Great Zhou wanted to kill him in a fit of rage, he would be able to find sufficient reasons to do so. "Is the supreme-grade spirit weapon custom-made for you, Your Majesty?" Su Zimo asked. "Yes." Ji Yaoshua nodded and extended her palm with a smile. "Hand it over. Let me take a look at Mr. Mo's custom-made flying sword and see if it's to my liking." Su Zimo smiled and took out a flying sword from his storage bag. The sword was 3 feet long and 2 feet wide. It was engraved with mysterious patterns that could be said to be the work of the gods and was beautiful. Su Zimo injected spirit energy into it. Whoosh! 4 spirit patterns lit up on the sword in a bedazzling manner. 4 spirit patterns, supreme grade. A look of envy flashed through Bai Yuhan's eyes as she looked at the flying sword. Although she was the commander of the White Hawk Guards, she did not have a single supreme grade spirit weapon. Ji Yaoshua received the flying sword with both hands and brushed her fingers across it. Although she felt the coldness of the sword, her heart was filled with warmth. Ji Yaoshua brushed her fingertips across the tip of the sword and flicked it gently. The sword trembled and let out a clear hum. Just the hum alone was enough to tell that the flying sword was a top-notch creation even among supreme-grade spirit weapons, and was infinitely close to being a perfect spirit weapon. Su Zimo took out a pale yellow robe from his storage bag and handed it to Ji Yaoshua. "This robe is for you as well." Ji Yaoshua received it. The pale yellow robe was extremely thin and light, giving off a slight chill to the touch. Ji Yaoshua's heart skipped a beat as she injected spirit energy into the robe. Whoosh! 4 spirit lights burst forth from the robe in a dazzling manner. "Ah!" Almost at the same time, Ji Yaoshua and Bai Yuhan exclaimed. It was another supreme-grade spirit weapon. Furthermore, it was a rare defensive supreme-grade spirit weapon. The contours of the robe seemed as though it was custom-made for Ji Yaoshua. At that moment, Bai Yuhan was no longer envious, she was jealous. That was way too extravagant. Who would gift a supreme-grade spirit weapon right off the bat? Ji Yaoshua lowered her head and pretended to size up the robe in her hands. Her cheeks were slightly flushed and her heart was in a mess. When he noticed Ji Yaoshua's expression, Su Zimo frowned slightly. The reason why he gave her the robe was because he saw Ji Yaoshua as a good friend. Furthermore, Ji Yaoshua was indebted to him and the Su family. Su Zimo did not want to cause Ji Yaoshua to misunderstand. Pondering for a moment, Su Zimo said in a seemingly casual manner, "I happened to buy some 1,000-year-old heavenly silkworm silk a while ago and used it to refine 3 robes. Apart from you, Xiaoning and Nianqi have them as well." When she heard that, Ji Yaoshua's eyes dimmed. However, Ji Yaoshua recovered before long. By the time she raised her head, she was already smiling. "Thank you. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.